Active will. The stage of action is the fifth stage of the will process. Here will manifests in voluntary action, i.e., the process of acting and moving by willpower. This is the final stage of the will process, the stage to which all the preceding stages have been but as preliminaries. In voluntary action the will manifests its unique character and nature. Toward the end of voluntary action all the energies of the will have been directed. Willpower essentially is concerned with action. All human actions are caused by will. Whenever emotion rises to motivity in action, that motivity and action is will action. Will is inevitably involved in all doing. The motor element of ideas is obtained from will. Theoretically, it may be said that decision and determination complete the process of will, and, indeed, the old psychologists so held and taught. But practical experience, supported by the teaching of the new psychology, insists that decisions and determinations are of little real value unless they proceed into action. The old saying that, "the road to hell is paved with good intentions," might well be altered in its phrasing so as to read that the pathway to inferno is paved with non-completed good decisions and aborted resolutions. Many persons are in the habit of thinking that when they decide and resolve to do a thing, then the matter is ended, and they need do nothing else in the matter. It is very easy to sit in a comfortable armchair and resolve that you will do thus and so in the world of action, but it is quite difficult to perform even 1/10 of the deeds which you may thus resolve and decide to do, though many persons do not seem to perceive the distinction and difference between the two processes. As William James has told us, you lie abed on a cold morning, and firmly resolve to get up and begin the work of the day, you decide that this is the only rational course to pursue, and you make up your mind to follow it, but often you do not even stir a muscle toward that action. In such cases it is only when the idea of getting up becomes disturbingly insistent, when your mental alarm clock rings most annoyingly and persistently, that you spring out of bed with a final protesting growl and grumble. The world is filled with persons who are unable to realize that deciding and resolving to do a thing is a far different matter from actually doing it. These persons seldom accomplish any real work of their own volition, all that they do they are forced to do by others or by the force of circumstances. They are always deciding to do things, resolving to do things, but they never actually do things. Their will processes are seldom completed. The men and women who do the work of the world, who achieve success, who accomplish their ends and aims, are those who, having grimly resolved and determined to do a certain thing, then complete the will process by moving into action in the direction of doing the thing in question. But here, again, we meet with another of those strange paradoxes with which the science of psychology abounds. We have just seen that if you expect to accomplish anything in the world you must pass beyond the stage of mere decision, resolution, and determination, you must rise to the plane of voluntary action. But, on the other hand, we must now inform you that if you expect your voluntary action to amount to anything, to be efficient, to accomplish its purpose, you must carry into your voluntary action a highly developed form of determination. In fact, when closely analyzed, voluntary action is seen to be purposeful determination manifesting its dynamic aspect. The subjective phase of determination is the static aspect of will, objective voluntary action is the dynamic aspect of will, the two are but twin aspects of the same thing, at the last. This fact being perceived, it follows that your effective voluntary action always must be preceded by, and accompanied by, strong, positive purposeful determination. Let us here repeat the definition of this term. The term purpose means the view, aim, design, intention, determination, resolution or will to accomplish or reach some particular object, that which a person sets before himself as the object to be gained or accomplished, the end or aim which one has in view in any plan, measure or exertion, that which one intends to do, hence, his intention, design, plan or project. The term determination, in this particular usage, is defined as strength or firmness of mind, firm resolve or resolution, an absolute direction to a certain end. From the foregoing definitions you will have no difficulty in forming a dear and positive concept of purposeful determination, but for the purpose of illustration we ask you to consider, ponder over, and memorize the following quotations from eminent writers. Each of these has been selected for a special purpose, and to awaken and bring out a certain phase of your willpower. They will help you to fill in the details of your mental picture or general idea of purposeful determination, that essential spirit of will. Buxton says, "The longer I live, the more certain I am that the great difference between men, between the feeble and the powerful, the great and the insignificant, is invincible determination, a purpose once fixed, and then victory or death. That quality will do anything that can be done in this world, and no talents, no circumstances, no opportunities, will make a two-legged creature a man without it." Mitchell says, "Resolve is what makes a man manifest, not a puny resolve, not errant purpose, but that strong and indefatigable will which treads down difficulties and danger as a boy treads down the heaving frost lands of winter, which kindles his eye and brain with a pulse beat toward the unattainable. Will makes men giants." Disraeli says, "I have brought myself by long meditation to the conviction that a human being with a settled purpose must accomplish it, and that nothing can resist a will which will stake even existence itself upon its fulfillment." Simpson says, "A passionate desire, and an unwearied will, can perform impossibilities, or what may seem to be such to the cold and feeble." Foster says, "It is wonderful to note how even the casualties of life seem to bow to a spirit that will not yield to them, and tend to subserve a design which they may, in their apparent tendency, threaten to frustrate. When a firm, decisive spirit is recognized, it is curious to see how the space clears around a man and leaves him room and freedom." Emerson says, "We go forth austere, dedicated, believing in iron links of destiny, and will not turn on our heels to save our lives. A book, a bust, or only the sound of a name shoots a spark through the nerves, and we suddenly believe in will. We cannot hear of personal vigor of any kind, great powers of performances, without fresh resolution." This, then, is the spirit in which you should institute your voluntary actions leading to the achievement and realization of your prime motives, your top values, your fixed standard, your summum bonum or chief good. You should approach your task in the spirit of the master formula of attainment which is referred to so frequently in our instruction, and which is as follows: 1. Definite ideals, 2. Insistent desire, 3. Confident expectation, 4. Persistent determination, and 5. Balanced compensation. We ask you to consider carefully the principles of this master formula which you are about to employ in your task of voluntary action leading toward achievement. Consider in detail its elements, as these are presented to you in the following several pages, ponder them carefully, commit to memory their essential points. 1. Definite ideals. Before you may proceed intelligently to do a thing, to obtain a thing, or to achieve a thing, it is necessary that you have a clear and definite idea and ideal of that thing. In your consideration of purposeful determination, you must not lose sight of the importance of purpose while you are developing determination. Determination will lose much of its dynamic force if it is scattered, or if the purpose directing it lacks definiteness and clearness. Remember that one of the definitions of determination is absolute direction to a certain end, and that purpose means the aim, design, intention, resolution, determination, and will to accomplish or to reach some particular object or end. Note particularly the reference to a certain end, and to some particular object or end. The words certain and particular imply definiteness, clearness, preciseness, specificness of meaning, idea and ideals. They point to the necessity of definite ideals and definite purpose. If definite direction is lacking in your voluntary action, then your purposeful determination has lost one of its strong arms. This first element of the master formula is very important in the case before us, the case of the manifestation of voluntary action and purposeful determination. Before you can really determine to act effectively, you must know the purpose of your action, the end to be attained, or the thing to be obtained, or the direction in which you wish to travel. The more definite and positive your purpose and aim, the greater will be the degree of concentration that you are able to apply to the task. Here you must bring to bear your powers of ideation and visualization. You must learn to map out the land over which you are to travel, to chart the seas over which you wish to sail. You must exercise your constructive ability in designing, planning, mapping out and making a working diagram of that which you wish to accomplish. You know the general direction, by reason of your knowledge of your prime motives, top values, and fixed standard, but probably you have failed to draw your plan in further detail, and to fill in all of the minor points. You must correct and overcome this deficiency, if it exists in your case. You may find it impossible to draw your plans in very close detail, however. In such case, do the best you can, draw the general outline as clearly as possible, and then fill in the details from time to time as soon as they take form in your constructive imagination. Do the best you can in the creation of a definite purpose. A little practice will enlarge your capacity for work of this kind. You would not expect a builder to erect a house for you unless he were supplied with a working plan by the architect. You would not expect a railroad contractor to build a line or road for you unless he were furnished with the plans of the engineer for such construction. Therefore, you must know positively, clearly and definitely what you wish to accomplish, the ends and aims to be attained, the direction of your efforts, the particular purpose you wish to work out into achievement, before you can expect to apply effectively your persistent determination. It is not scientific for you to sing, "I don't know where I'm going, but I'm on the way." You must know where you're going, and, not only that, you must also know for just what purpose you are going there, and what you are likely to meet with on the road. You must take a lesson from the old story of the architect on the witness stand. He stated that one of his profession was required to plan every building. The opposing lawyer sneeringly asked him, "Pray tell us, then, who was the architect of the Tower of Babel?" The architect promptly answered, "There was none, sir," hence the confusion and failure. By reference to the quotations on a preceding page, you will see that the quoted writers have laid special emphasis upon the purpose well fixed, the settled purpose, the design. Disraeli's statement that a human being with a settled purpose must accomplish it gives us the keynote. The purpose must not only be clear and definite, but it also must be a fixed and settled purpose, a purpose adhered to with dogged persistency and determined steadfastness. The more clearly you can see just what you want to do, the better able will you be to do it, and the more determined you will be to materialize that idealized and visualized purpose. You must not only want to hard enough, but you must also know just what you want, to know it clearly enough, and definitely enough. Possessing and manifesting these powers of your mental and emotional being, you are prepared to apply and to exercise your purposeful determination to its utmost capacity and with its full powers. Having discovered your purpose in life, you must proceed to manifest it in voluntary action, and to materialize it. The more definite and clear the mental picture, the more definite and positive will be the materialization. 2. Insistent desire. You have become acquainted with the facts concerning the power of desire. You have seen that all will power is set into operation by desire, and that the degree of manifested will power is directly proportionate to the degree of the desire back of and under it. This being so, you need no further argument concerning the necessity of manifesting strong, positive desire when you wish to accomplish anything. You realize that the flame of desire is needed to generate the steam of voluntary action. Toward the attainment of the objects or circumstances represented by your top values, or prime motives, or the manifestation of your fixed standard, you should ever seek to manifest that insistent, imperious, dominant feeling and desire which will not be denied. This mental state we have repeatedly illustrated by the example of the drowning or suffocating man demanding air, the starving man demanding food, the shipwrecked or desert-lost man demanding water, the wild creature demanding its mate, the mother creature demanding the safety and welfare of its young. This is the spirit of insistent desire in which you should approach your task of voluntary action toward the attainment of your prime motives and top values. 3. Confident expectation. The mental state represented by the term confident expectation is one of positive value to you. Its opposite, i.e., the mental state of fearful doubt, is most harmful to you. Confident expectation tends to release into activity all the powers of your mental being, and to fill them with that eagerness for accomplishment which is based upon confidence and belief in the final successful outcome. Fear and doubt tend to paralyze the will, while faith and hope tend to energize and inspire it. We need not here go into the psychology of this fact. Sufficient for the present purpose is the statement of the fact itself, and the reference to common experience to illustrate its operations. If you will consider the cases of the men and women who have accomplished great things in the world, along any of the many lines of human endeavor, you will see that in every case such individuals have been inspired by the belief in their ultimate success. They have confidently expected a successful outcome. Had they believed otherwise, they would not have had the courage and perseverance which have enabled them to overcome the obstacles in their path, and to mount to success upon the stepping stones of their own apparent failures. It is confident expectation, that combination of faith and hope, which enables one to act upon the adage, when you feel that you must let go, then hang on the harder, for victory is near. When we realize the effect of confident expectation upon the will activities, we are almost impelled to agree fully with Tanner in his celebrated statement that, to believe firmly is almost tantamount to accomplishment. But whether or not this principle may be carried that far, it is unquestionable that confident expectation is a most powerful and mighty element in successful and effective voluntary action. In this instruction we have urged the adoption of the slogan, I can, I will, I dare, I do. The I can is based upon confident expectation, the I dare springs from the same inner conviction of ultimate success. In fact, the spirit of confident expectation breathes through and pervades the whole of the slogan, and all the processes of the awakened will. 4. Persistent determination. Here we approach the characteristic element of purposeful determination. The very word determination carries with it the idea and thought of persistency. There is present the idea of persistency in all applications of the I can, I will, I dare, I do slogan or maxim. There must always be present not only the determination to do the thing, but also the persistent application of the will to the task. Determination without persistency would be like the play of Hamlet with the character of Hamlet omitted. In fact, it is difficult to form a concept of practical willpower unless we include in the concept the element of active persistency. The persistent will is the effective will, the real will in action. Whatever else we may conceive effective will to be, we must always conceive it as being persistent. In persistent determination you manifest willpower not only in voluntary action, but also in the task of steadying and holding to its work the dynamic power of will. When you have gained complete control of your aroused willpower, you must apply to its activities the quality of persistence. This quality you must manifest in steadfastness, firmness, fixed intention, positive direction and unfailing constancy in continuing the course chosen. You must manifest it by steadfastly pursuing the work undertaken, and in holding fast to the general plan designed to govern that work. You must manifest it in perseverance in spite of obstacles and discouragements, and in steadfastness in face of opposition and hindrances. The characteristics of persistent determination are stability, perseverance, fixedness of purpose, tenacity, doggedness and persistent application. Persistent determination enables you to hold your will close to its task, to hold it there firmly and continuously until success is attained and the victory is won. Success in many instances depends upon the application of persistent determination, the manifestation of the power and determination to hold on to the last. Many a man possessing the other qualities of willpower has fought a brave fight, but just before the tide turned in his favor he has relinquished his efforts, and has dropped out of the fight, defeated, not by circumstances, but by his own lack of persistent determination. By studying the lives of the great inventors, Morse and Edison, for instance, you will see the utmost importance of this faculty of holding on, and this spirit of never say die. 5. Balanced compensation. This element of the master formula finds its familiar expression in the phrase, paying the price. In all attainment the price must be paid. Compensation is a law of nature, and manifests its force on all planes of existence, and in all forms of activity. One who seeks to attain anything must be prepared to pay the price. The price may consist of work performed, of perseverance, persistent application, industry and diligence, or service rendered to others with whom one has business or similar relations, of ability and willingness to give, value received for what he obtains for himself, of the sacrifice and renunciation of ideas, ideals, feelings, desires, aims and ambitions, which are opposed to the subject or object represented by the prime motives and top values. One must be willing to sacrifice the lesser values for the greater ones. All men who achieve and attain anything worthwhile have paid the price in all of the various forms just mentioned. Compensation is a necessity of attainment. There is always a balance struck between what one gets and what he gives or gives up. He who seeks to escape paying the price is defying a great law of nature and of life. It is as if in the cosmos there were maintained a great ledger, in which there is both a credit and a debit column on each page. The law is continually striking balances, trial balances, and final settlements. The wise realize this, and profit by their knowledge. The fools ignore it, and are the losers by reason of their folly. Say the gods to men, what do you want? Take it, and pay for it. The spirit of the active will. The following quotations from eminent writers will serve to illustrate the spirit of the active will, particularly in its phase of purposeful determination. You should consider each of the quotations carefully, ponder them earnestly, and commit them to memory. Each one of them has been selected for the purpose of bringing out some particular point or principle, and each and all of them are designed to serve as an inspirational maxim for you in moments of trial, temptation, doubt or discouragement. They are veritable potions of will tonic. We defy you to repeat them earnestly without feeling the vibrations and thrill of will stirring your soul, and awakening the spirit of, I can, I will, I dare, I do. Kennan says, in this world, the human spirit with its dominating force, the will, may be and ought to be superior to all bodily sensations and all accidents of environment. Harriet Beecher Stowe says, when you get into a tight place and everything goes against you until it seems that you cannot hold on for a minute longer, never give up then, for that is just the place and time that the tide will turn. D'Alembert says, go on, sir, go on. The difficulties you meet with will resolve themselves as you advance. Proceed, and the light will dawn, and shine with increasing clearness on your path. Henry Ward Beecher says, it is defeat that turns bone to flint, and gristle to muscle and makes men invincible, and form those heroic natures that are now in ascendancy in the world. Do not be afraid of defeat. You are never so near victory as when defeated in a good cause. Coiler says, it is astonishing how many men lack the power of holding on until they reach the goal. They can make a sudden dash, but they lack grit. They are easily discouraged. They get on as long as everything moves smoothly, but when there is friction they lose heart. They depend upon stronger personalities for their spirit and strength. They lack independence or originality. They only dare to do what others do. They do not step boldly from the crowd and act fearlessly. Emerson says, I know no such unquestionable badge and ensign of a sovereign mind as that of tenacity of purpose, which, through all changes of companions or parties or fortunes, changes never, bates no jot of heart or hope, but wearies out opposition and arrives at its port. John Hunter says, is there one whom difficulties dishearten, who bends to the storm? He will do little. Is there one who wills to conquer? That kind of man never fails. Napoleon Bonaparte said, the truest wisdom is a resolute determination. Munger says, a strong defiant purpose is many-handed, and lays hold on whatever is near that can serve it. It has a magnetic power that draws to itself whatever is kindred. Wirt says, the man who is perpetually hesitating which of two things he will do first, will do neither. The man who resolves, but suffers his resolution to be changed by the first counter-suggestion of a friend, who fluctuates from opinion to opinion, from plan to plan, and veers like a weathercock to every point of the compass, with every breath of caprice that blows, can never accomplish anything real or useful. It is only the man who first consults well, then resolves firmly, and then executes his purposes with inflexible perseverance, undismayed by those petty difficulties which daunt a weaker spirit, that man can advance to eminence in any line. Fothergill says, "Willpower is one of the greatest natural endowments, as it is one of the finest outcomes of self-culture. The man who succeeds in climbing, step by step, finds his willpower expanding with his energies, with the demands upon him. Strength of will is gameness, the power to stay." Englishmen have always prided themselves upon their game qualities, whether the tenacity of their bulldogs, the endurance of their race horses, the unflinching courage of their game fowls, or their own indomitable purpose. Where there's a will, there's a way. The way may be long hidden from sight, hard to find, long and wearisome, seemingly endless, but on it the traveler goes with unshaken resolution, to success at last. In purposeful determination and voluntary action thereupon, the will deliberately chooses an end or object to be attained, and then proceeds to manifest the determination in outward form and action. It proceeds to its end with intensity of purpose and directness of aim. The end must be clear, definite and capable of distinct visualization. The effort to gain that end must call into operation the whole nature of the will, and the whole force and energy of the will power. As it has well been said, the whole, living strength of the will must be literally hurled into it, not once or twice, but again and again, until it is accomplished. The purposeful determination must be real, it must be meant by you with the full power of your soul. You must not trifle with such resolutions, you must be in deadly earnest about them. Remember that the honor and integrity of your will is at stake, and that you must not bring discredit upon it. To break such a resolution is to bring shame upon yourself and to your will. You will do well to remember and to follow the advice given by a religious writer upon the subject, who bids his pupils to proceed to will by first making the following statement. Yes. Before God, I mean that. I mean it as intensely and really as I can ever mean anything. I will keep that resolution. I know that I can and will keep it, because I mean it. Further, I will take every precaution to keep it alive and vigorous within me by remaking it again and again. This is the essence and spirit of purposeful determination. Strive ever to attain, sustain, and manifest it. This is the flash of the will that can. Will training. It is not enough that you should develop strong will power, important though such development may be. It is not enough that the driver should secure the services of a strong pair of horses to pull his chariot, he must also be able to guide and control, direct and master them. So, though you may be possessed of the strongest will, you will be unable to direct efficiently its energies and powers unless by careful, scientific training and discipline you have mastered its mechanism. To train your will you must teach it and cultivate it, you must educate it, exercise it, discipline it, so as to impart to it the habit and tendency to move along the lines which your reason indicates to be the most advantageous and efficient. All scientific training of the will begins with instruction concerning the formation of advantageous habits, the building of clean and clear paths over which the will may travel in action toward achievement. By establishing the proper habits of will action you will render your will far more efficient, and at the same time will accomplish the maximum of desirable results with the minimum expenditure of energy. Here we meet with another of those interesting paradoxes which, as we have said, abound in the realm of psychology. The paradox is, a. While the will moves most easily and with the least friction over the paths of habit, yet, b. Habit itself is originally formed by the exercise of the will. The will lends itself most readily to habit, and prefers to travel over the lines of least resistance, in habit motivity, yet, when set to the task, the will builds the lines and paths of advantageous and desirable habits over which it will travel in the future. It acts as does the strong and powerful stream of water which first cuts for itself a deep channel in the earth, and afterwards travels through that channel as if bound and restricted by it. Both the stream and the will are bound and restricted by their self-built channels, but each creates for itself its future restricting and directing walls. Habit has its correspondence in material objects. In fact, all things seem to come under the rule of habit in some form. A piece of paper, or a pattern of cloth, will tend to fold more easily along the lines of the crease made by the first folding. The more often the fold is made, the easier becomes each subsequent folding along the same lines. Water finds it easier to travel over the path traversed by the preceding streams of water. The raindrop on the window pane follows the same law. Any voluntary action performed several times in the same general way tends to develop into a motion habit, and, indeed, after a time the motion becomes almost instinctive, and is performed by the subconscious mentality to which it has been passed on for attention and direction. Each and every time you dress yourself, or put on your shoes, you perform a number of habitual actions of which you are scarcely conscious. This is also true of your actions of walking, using your knife and fork, and other familiar performances which have become habitual to you. The value of habit in the training and education of the will is very great. Not only does habit, 1. Simplify the process of any given form of action, and 2. Lessen the degree of voluntary attention required for the performance of any given action, but it also, 3. Gives greatly increased weight and power to the emotional impulse toward any given action, thus increasing its emotional value and thereby enabling it to resist more effectively the demands and urging of an opposing set of emotional impulses and desires. When you have made a habit of efficient and advantageous will action, you will have progressed far on the road to the attainment of strong and efficient will power. Rules for establishing habits of will. The following rules will be found most useful and effective in your task of establishing the proper habits of will. In applying them you must employ your table of will values and your fixed standard to determine which particular habits you shall strive to develop, cultivate and acquire. When in the following rules you come across the words, the habit, or the habits, you will understand that such terms apply to those habits which express the desires, tested by reason, which stand well to the top of your table of will values, or else to minor courses of will action which serve to further the interests of these high values. Here follow the rules. I. Employ a strong initiative. In launching a new habit, employ a strong initiative. Put as much determination and motor energy as possible into the particular course of action, at the start. Launch the ship of habit as far as possible into the stream of action, employing the full strength of the determination and will force at your command. This will impart to the new habit sufficient momentum to carry it well past the first dangerous places, and to give you a good running start. Your principal danger of yielding to temptation will come at the start, but if your momentum is sufficient to carry you past these earlier temptations you will be able more easily to resist the later ones. The longer you manage to postpone the time of the first temptations, the less power will those temptations have over you. Therefore, always remember, try to get a good running start. 2. Exercise care at the beginning. The beginning of the formation of the new habit is the most critical time of the entire task. This because the power of the opposing habit has not as yet begun to fade by reason of the manifestation of the opposite, i.e., the new habit. The rule is, never allow even a single exception or failure to occur until the new habit has become well established. Until the new habit has become well rooted, you must brave it with all your power against the stormy winds of temptation and opposition. It has well been said that failure or yielding to temptation at this early stage is like letting fall the ball of string which you have been carefully winding. The single slip undoes more than many turns of the hand will be able to rewind. The psychology of the case is this: the two opposing impulses must be handled so that the advantageous one may have an uninterrupted series of successes, and the disadvantageous one a continuous series of failures. The result of this preliminary series of conflicts plays a very important part in the determination of the future relation of the two opposing forces. Here is found to apply the rule of, to him who hath shall be given, and to him who hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. The habit of victory once acquired by the advantageous impulse, it will thereafter possess an immense psychological advantage over its repeatedly defeated opponent. The man who determines to establish a certain advantageous habit will surely fail if he follows Rip Van Winkle's plan of saying that this one doesn't count whenever temptation to violate the rule presents itself. The taking of just one cigar when you have decided to stop smoking, or the taking of just one little extra snooze when you have decided to establish the habit of rising at a certain hour, may prove to be the undoing of the entire purposeful determination. On the other hand, each time one of those early, just one more, indulgences is resisted and defeated, the purposeful determination becomes stronger, often to a degree out of all proportion to the apparent present actual value of the accomplishment. 3. Repeated performance. In establishing a habit, you should repeat the performance of the associated action as frequently as possible. You will by that means make clearer and wider the mental path over which you wish your will to travel habitually. Moreover, as a consequence, you will exercise the particular faculty which you wish to make strong and to develop in efficiency. The will is strengthened not by the mere mental determination to perform an action, but rather by the actual performance of the action itself. The path of motivity is created only by actually traveling over it, and the oftener it is traveled over, the easier becomes the future journey over it. The actual motor effect of will action gives the set to the brain cells and areas involved in any particular course of action. The actual effort forces you to dig your heels in the ground and to exert your energy. As it has well been said, he who has no solid ground to press against will never get beyond the stage of gesture-making. Therefore, seek every possible opportunity for such action until the habit becomes firmly established. A lock works better after it has been used several times, a garment clings better to the body after it has been worn a few times, the cloth folds more easily in the crease after it has been folded a few times, and as an old writer once said, continued action is like a stream of water, which wears for itself a channel from which it may not easily be turned. 4. Control the attention. So far as possible, do not allow the attention to dwell upon ideas suggesting a course of action opposed to that associated with the new habit. Keep the attention fixed, so far as is possible, upon the ideas associated with the new habit. Thus you will feed the one set of motor ideas, and starve the opposite set. If you are trying to break yourself of the habit of smoking, you are very foolish if you allow your mind to dwell upon the pleasures of the pipe, cigar, or cigarette. Instead, let it hold the suggestive ideas and mental pictures of the advantages to be gained by refraining from smoking, and, above all, hold firmly before the mind the idea that you are demonstrating that you have a will strong enough to enable you to break an undesirable habit. You will do well, particularly at first, to follow the example of the companions of Ulysses, who stopped their ears with wax that they might not hear the seductive voices of the sirens. The voyagers who neglected this precaution were lured to their destruction, because they allowed the tempting sounds to enter their ears. This is not cowardice, but the part of courage, when rightly understood. He jests at scars, who never felt a wound. As has well been said, it takes more courage to turn away from some ideas than to face them, and the coward is sometimes he who remains on the scene. One of the most effective methods of inhibiting or neutralizing the power of a disturbing or threatening desire or impulse is that of deliberately changing the direction of the attention. It is an axiom of psychology that, while attention follows interest, nevertheless, attention may be directed by a determined act of will so as to arouse interest not previously present. This interest, so awakened, rises to desire, and desire gives motive power and direction to will. In this axiom we have the key to the problem which we are now considering. It is a well-established fact of psychology that, in the processes of the deliberative will and of the determinative will, that particular alternative which in some way attracts and holds the attention will have greater weight and power than would otherwise be the case. The interesting alternative is given the more favorable position, while the uninteresting one is pushed to the side, sometimes unjustly. This process is akin to that which we experience in ourselves when we give the preference to a political candidate whom we know and like, rather than to one unfamiliar to us and who does not arouse our interested attention. In view of this fact, you may see how important it is that you should direct and hold your attention, so far as is possible, upon the course of action which your reason and your table of will values inform you to be the best and more advantageous one, and to shut out of your attention and interest, so far as is possible, the opposing alternative. By doing this you give to the advantageous idea the added strength of attention and interest, and you place the objectionable idea in the far less favorable position. Many a man has prevented himself from acting foolishly and wrongfully by determinately turning his attention to the probable consequences of the proposed harmful action. It has been well called a master stroke of the inhibitory battle to bring into the field of consciousness an idea of the benefits of a contrary action, or the mental picture of the evil effects of the proposed action. The drunkard thinking of the sick child at home is strengthened in his effort to inhibit the urge of appetite. The more that Macbeth and his wife held in mind and pictured in imagination the idea of fame and power, the stronger grew their desire and determination to kill the king. Their attention developed increased interest and desire, and thus heightened the power of the original motive. The will is able to determine which of the motives influencing it shall become the stronger. It accomplishes this by deciding which of two alternative sets of ideas shall occupy the field of attention during the desire conflict. Emotion and desire develop under the stimulus of attention. The will, being the master of attention, has the power to encourage or to banish the ideas calling forth the emotional feeling and the resulting desires. If one set of ideas is kept well in the field of attention, a strong emotional interest and desire may gather around it, but if the opposite set of ideas is called into the field of attention, and is then held firmly there, then the first set of ideas will lose interest and motive power. This principle is illustrated in one of Molière's comedies. Yeppie, a dissolute character, is sent by his wife, a washerwoman, to the village shop to buy a piece of soap, and is entrusted with a small coin for that purpose. But Yeppie wants a drink. He knows that his wife will beat him if he wastes the money, but he also knows that he has a strong craving for the glass of wine. A desire conflict ensues. Yeppie says to himself, "My stomach says wine, my back says soap." He is torn by the internal struggle. Finally, as he walks along, he sees the tavern ahead of him. This decides the conflict, the object in the field of attention proving stronger than that which is outside that field. He says, "Is not a man's stomach more to him than his back?" "Yes," say I, and into the tavern he walks. Had he but looked around the corner and there seen his wife wearing a look of determination on her face, and carrying a big stick in her hand as she marched after him, he would have decided in favor of his back rather than his stomach. The two sets of desires and impulses were nicely balanced in the case of Yeppie, but the added element of aroused attention and interest brought the victory for the wine, and the defeat of the soap. The following rules will be found useful in connection with the direction of attention in will training, particularly in the matter of inhibiting and restraining the unwelcome and disturbing desires and impulses which pull in the direction opposed to that of the high values and the fixed standard. 1. Feed the positives. Feed the will with suggestive ideas and mental pictures favorably representing the desires and actions which constitute the top values of your table of will values, and which are in accord with your fixed standard. 2. Starve the negatives. Starve the disadvantageous desires and impulses, and their resulting actions, by resolutely refusing to allow your attention to be directed toward suggestive ideas and mental pictures favorably representing the desires and actions constituting the low values, or bottom values, of your table of will values, and which are in opposition to your fixed standard. 3. The law of opposites. In cultivating an advantageous desire or impulse, and its resulting action, resolutely refuse to allow your attention and imagination to become occupied with suggestive ideas and mental pictures favorably representing the opposite set of desires and impulses and their resulting action. In restraining, inhibiting or neutralizing a disadvantageous desire or impulse and its resulting action, deliberately and determinately direct your attention and imagination upon the suggestive ideas and mental pictures which favorably represent the opposing, i.e., the advantageous, set of desires and impulses, and their resulting actions. The reason for the above rules is as follows. 1. Attention and interest feed desires and impulses, and strengthen ideas. Lack of attention and interest starve them. 2. By bestowing attention and interest upon one set of desires, impulses, or ideas, you tend to inhibit, weaken, and starve the opposite set. Both of these facts are highly important. You should memorize this statement concerning them. Exercises in will training. The observance of the rules stated in the foregoing portions of this section will be found to give the will considerable valuable exercise in will training. In addition to these, however, there are several general forms of exercises which will prove of great value to you in the direction of strengthening the fiber of your will, and of developing your powers of steadfastness, resolution, and determination. By exercising your will against obstacles, opposition, and hindrances, those existing in the outer world, and those which have their abode in your inner world of habit, desire, and impulse, you give to your will a resisting power and an aggressive force which will make themselves felt in the affairs and conduct of your everyday life when you are required to assert your will power and strength of will. Your attention is now called to the following principles and methods of will training directed to these ends. Tempering the will along the lines of resistance. The practical thinkers of the race, for centuries past, have known that one of the best possible exercises for the development of strong will power, and for its efficient training, is that of the deliberate and determined performance of certain selected unpleasant tasks. This performance being undertaken and carried out not necessarily by reason of any actual immediate value to oneself or others of the performance itself, but, rather, solely and simply because of the valuable exercise of the will thus obtained, and the equally valuable training of the will accomplished by these means. Many of the ancient occult teachers began the instruction of their pupils in this way, the result being that the persistent practice of this method, under the intelligent guidance of the teachers, developed and trained the pupils into veritable giants of will power. The world-renowned Jesuit order has for hundreds of years employed similar methods for the purpose of strengthening the wills of their chosen students and neophytes. As a result, the Jesuits are renowned for the powers of determination, persistency, and endurance manifested by their members. Many of the best modern psychologists have revived this old teaching and its methods, and references to the principle may be found in many of the textbooks of the modern masters of this branch of science. For instance, the following statement of William James, one of the best practical philosophers and psychologists of modern times: keep the faculty alive by a little gratuitous exercise every day. That is, be systematically ascetic or heroic in little unnecessary points, do every day something for no other reason than that you would rather not do it, so that when the hour of dire need draws nigh, it may find you not unnerved and untrained to stand the test. ****** The man who has daily inured himself to habits of concentrated attention, energetic volition, and self-denial in unnecessary things, will stand like a tower when everything rocks around him, and when his softer fellow mortals are winnowed like chaff in the blast. See how closely the above resembles in practice the discipline of the ancient magi, or occultists. Says Evelyn Underhill, the first lesson of the would-be magus is self-mastery. In its essence, magical initiation is a traditional form of mental discipline, strengthening and focusing the will. There is nothing supernatural about it. Like the more arduous, more disinterested self-training of the mystic, it is character building with an object, conducted upon a heroic scale. Says Eliphaz Levi, by means of persevering and gradual athletics the powers of the body may be developed to an amazing extent. It is the same with the powers of the soul. Would you govern yourself and others? Learn how to will. How may one learn to will? This is the first secret of magical initiation, and it was to make the foundations of this secret thoroughly understood that the antique keepers of the mysteries surrounded the approach to the sanctuary with so many terrors and illusions. They did not believe in a will until it had given its proofs, and they were right. Strength cannot prove itself except by conquest. Idleness and negligence are the enemies of will, and this is the reason why all religions have multiplied their practices and made their cults difficult and minute. The more trouble one gives himself for an idea, the more power one acquires in regard to that idea. Hence the power of religions resides entirely in the inflexible will of those who practice them. The ancient and modern method of accustoming the will to face and to accomplish disagreeable tasks, and to overcome disagreeable conditions by sheer determination, is one of the very best systems of schooling in tempering the will. By accustoming the will to act in this way, you will school it so that it will act efficiently when similar conditions arise in actual life. This has well been called tempering the will along the lines of the greatest resistance. The will trained in this way is always ready to meet disagreeable emergencies, no matter how suddenly they may present themselves, nor how serious they may be. It has well been said of men trained in this way, that while others will be crying over spilt milk, the possessors of trained wills of this kind will be hunting for another cow to milk, or may even have found such a cow and to have actually begun to milk her. On the other hand, the person who carefully and habitually endeavors to escape unpleasant tasks, disagreeable facts, and uncomfortable circumstances, lacks such preparatory training of his will. When he is actually confronted with disagreeable circumstances or apparently disastrous conditions, his will be unequal to the task of overcoming them. The men who have pushed and elbowed their way to the front ranks of endeavor in any of the walks of life, have developed wills of this kind. Some of them have obtained the development by strenuous experiences in the University of Hard Knocks, while others have anticipated and forestalled this by scientific preparation before the day of the actual examination. Life is filled with disagreeable tasks and uncomfortable circumstances. To perform the first, and to master the second, requires the trained will. Wise is he who learns his lesson before the hour of trial, he is doubly armed for the fray. Training of this kind has been likened to fire insurance on a house. It costs something in effort and self-denial, but it is something laid by for the hour of need. It is the great reserve fund of habitual will action upon which you can draw in the time of necessity. The importance of such training cannot be overestimated. It is like starting and maintaining an account in a good savings bank. You add to it little by little, and you accumulate rapidly by reason of the compound interest drawn by your deposits. A well-known teacher was wont to advise his pupils to do something occasionally for no other reason than that they would rather not do it, if it were no more than giving up a seat in a streetcar. Napoleon had a will trained along these lines. His will was so completely under his control that apparently without any emotional struggle he could enter upon courses of disagreeable, difficult and unpleasant action, even though they involved the greatest hardships. You will find numerous opportunities to exercise your will along this line of training. Every day will furnish you with such. Do something which you particularly dislike to do it not because there is any special merit in the doing, but solely and simply because of the training it will give your will. It is related of a certain man that he was discovered one day carefully studying John Stuart Mill's great work on political economy, a subject which he loathed, and for which he lost no opportunity to express his aversion. When asked why he was doing this, he replied, "I am training my will, I am doing this because I dislike it intensely." The great men of history have trained their will along this line of the greatest resistance, while the average men have been content to exercise their will only along the lines of the least resistance. The former have so trained themselves that when they are required to perform some disagreeable action they do so with as much ease and force as if the action were most agreeable to them. The latter find it almost impossible to perform disagreeable actions except by whipping and spurring themselves to the task, and even then they perform the action only half-heartedly and with but little force or effectiveness. You are positively advised to master this feature of your will training. The day will come when you will thank us from the bottom of your heart for this advice, provided you have followed it. Tempering the will by self-denial. Akin to the preceding exercise is that which consists of the occasional practice of self-denial, i.e., the deliberate denial to yourself of your favorite pleasure. This denial is not to be made because of any direct merit in the sacrifice, or in the act, but merely because of the exercise of the will which is required for the denial, and because of the additional strength acquired by its performance. Many of the penances and other acts of self-denial imposed by the governing authorities of the great religions of the world tend to develop will power in the individual practicing them. This fact is acknowledged by the best authorities, but it is not generally realized by the masses of people practicing the acts in question. The great religious teachers know that the person who has trained his will along the lines of occasional self-denial will find it easier to resist real temptation when it comes to him. Psychology recognizes a practical value in self-denial and penance, aside from their purely religious elements. The general principles which govern the exercises designed to temper the will by the performance of disagreeable and unpleasant tasks, which we have just considered, apply also to the present case of tempering the will by self-denial. The performance of disagreeable tasks, and the act of refraining from agreeable expressions and manifestations, are alike displeasing to the untrained will. Therefore, the same principle is involved in both, and the will is thereby trained along the same general lines, though the approach is made from opposite directions. In the method of training the will by the practice of self-denial, you must deliberately select some most pleasant action or course of action, something which you wish very much to perform, and then resolutely refuse to perform the same within a certain time limit. The denial may involve the refusal to smoke your customary after-dinner cigar, to drink your favorite cup of coffee, to read the conclusion of an interesting book or of the new installment of a serial story, to eat some particularly desired and favored dish, to attend some play which you have been very anxious to witness, in fact, the refusal to do any particular thing which you earnestly long to do. The time limit must be definitely fixed, and must be strictly observed. There is a positive psychological value to the definite time limit. You must be absolutely honest in your selection of the object of your self-denial, it must involve a real test, and must require a real effort of the will to accomplish. You must give up something of real emotional value to yourself, of course only for the time of the exercise, or within the time limits deliberately set by yourself at the start. The time limit must be sufficiently extended to afford a real test of the will. The self-denial must hurt, it must be sufficient to make you smart. You must be a severe taskmaster to yourself in these trials, tests, and exercises. There must be no trifling or fooling in the matter. You must set yourself a real man's job, and you must be the real man to accomplish it. Note, in each of the two classes of exercises just considered, you will act wisely not to select tasks of such a nature or character that their successful performance will bring you that comfortable feeling of religious or ethical merit, or of duty well performed, nor anything which you are in duty bound to do, or not to do, in accordance with your accepted codes of religious, ethical, or moral duty or obligation. This caution is necessary because, otherwise, you would have the positive value of duty, or religious or moral obligations, to add weight to your resolute determination and its manifestation. In these exercises you should endeavor to select tasks in which the only motive is the will, to pit the will against the push or pull of feelings, impulses and desires, and you should deny to yourself the aid of the added weight of duty, or obligations such as have been mentioned. The only reason for the performance of these exercises is that of arousing the will to will, willing for the sake of willing, while willing merely to prove that it is will. Reversing habits. A third method, involving the same general principles, is that either, 1. Of doing something which it is your regular habit and custom not to do, or, 2. Of not doing something which it is your regular habit and custom to do. In either of these phases of this exercise, you should select as the task to be performed some action for which you have no special like or dislike apart from the habit, something neither especially agreeable nor yet especially disagreeable, but which you usually do, or not do, solely by reason of an established habit. Some little regular habit of dressing, of proceeding to your business by a certain route, of lunching at a certain place or in a certain part of the room, or something of that kind, such are the tasks to be selected. This may seem like silly trifling when you first think of it, but wait until you actually try it. You have a surprise awaiting you. Set a time limit here, as in the other cases. As a few examples, we might suggest the following: after ascertaining which particular shoe, or stocking, you put on first in dressing, deliberately reverse the order for the period of 1 week. Or, follow the same procedure in the matter of placing your right or your left arm, as the case may be, first in your coat when you put it on, change the order of the arm placing for the period of 1 week. Or, again, change the choice of your morning or afternoon newspaper for 1 day, occasionally. Or, pursue a different route from that usually followed by you in traveling from one place to another daily, or oftener. This is effective only when you have already established the habit of making the daily trip along a certain regular route. If you will exercise your ingenuity, you will discover many little tasks of this kind to be performed. And, in so doing, you will not only train your will along particularly trying lines, but will also learn a valuable lesson concerning the power of habit in the little courses of action in everyday life. Performing uninteresting tasks. Another method, and one greatly favored in some quarters, is that of deliberately performing some monotonous, purposeless, and uninteresting task, just for the sake of willing to will. For instance, 1. Sitting on a chair for 5 minutes, with the arms crossed, and the feet pressed together at the sides of the shoe soles. 2. Walking to and fro in your room for 5 minutes, touching a number of articles in regular order as you pass them. 3. Counting and recounting a number of small articles, for 5 minutes. 4. Changing your chair at every count of 25, for 5 minutes. 5. Reading backward and forward a certain paragraph of a book, this one for instance, for 5 minutes. 6. Replacing in a box, very slowly and deliberately, 100 matches, buttons or small pieces of paper. 7. Putting on and taking off a pair of gloves, slowly and deliberately, for 5 minutes. The above examples will give you a general idea of the character of this class of exercises, but actual practice of them will be required to show you the amount of persistent resolution and determination required to perform them properly. Tempering the will by asserting it. Another valuable form of will training, but one which must be employed judiciously, is that in which the will is tempered by actual assertion of its power. By assertion, we do not mean to affirm, to aver, to state positively, which is one usage of the term. Instead, we mean that usage which indicates to maintain or defend by words or measures, to vindicate. In tempering the will by assertion, you proceed to assert your will in little things, so as to have your own way about such things irrespective of the actual benefit to be gained direct and immediate. The sole object is to habituate the will to having its way, and thereby to give it confidence in itself and to build up in it the habit of success. You will find that you have been in the habit of giving way to others in the little things concerning action and the doing of things, solely because it has been too much trouble to make an effort of will in the opposite direction. In such cases, when the other person happens to be possessed of a more persistent will to do the little things in his own way, you have found it easier to let him proceed in that way, this notwithstanding that you assert your will readily enough in the greater issues of life. There is a possible danger in allowing the will to acquire too readily the habit of deferring to the will of others by reason of this repeated and customary lack of assertion in the little things. A little vigorous exercise along these lines, once in a while, will act like a tonic to the will, and will keep it in good condition. In exercise of this kind, you should employ your will to assert itself not because of any particular or direct benefit to be derived by securing the thing or action insisted upon, but solely as an exercise of the will itself, and in the direction of establishing the habit of victory for it. In fact, in such exercises you should select something in which nothing of real value is involved, something of no consequence. The exercise should proceed absolutely along the lines of the will to will, and not along those of the pursuit and attainment of something desired for itself. It should be like a physical exercise pursued solely for the purpose of developing and strengthening the muscles, and not for that of performing useful work or attaining some actual desired object. Here, a word of caution is needed. Do not make the mistake of asserting your will wantonly, or for the purpose of overriding and humiliating others needlessly. Again, do not so use it as to create for yourself the reputation of being stubborn or unreasonable, or for having your own way regardless of the rights of others. Avoid all exercises which will attract attention to yourself or to your motives in the matter. You will find enough opportunities to exercise in this way without this drawback. Finally, do not insist upon having your way in the little things when by so doing you jeopardize having your way in the greater things in view, and, equally, do not insist upon having your way if your own way is the wrong way, and the other way is the right one. Mix common sense and fair play in this exercise of the will. The exercise will be all the better by reason of this. But, with the above cautions in mind, get into the habit of having your own way in the little, unimportant things, at least once in a while, just to get the habit well established and to keep the machinery of will well oiled and running smoothly. Do not let your will get rusty, or gummed up, by reason of disuse and lack of exercise. Bracing the will with affirmations. You will find it beneficial to follow the method of bracing the will with affirmations of its own powers and possibilities. Affirmations and statements of this kind act as a veritable will tonic and invigorator. Along these lines you may use with effect the poem by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, quoted in Section 1 of this book, also the quotations given in Section 6 of this book, in which are expressed the thoughts of some of the great minds of the race concerning willpower and its possibilities. All of these quotations have been selected with some particular important point in view. You may also employ in this way the master formula of attainment, viz., I, definite ideals, 2. Insistent desire, 3. Confident expectations, 4. Persistent determination, v. Balanced compensation. And, likewise, the slogan, I can. I will, I dare, I do. You might add to the list any favorite quotations of your own, provided that they serve to inspire, energize and strengthen your purposeful determination and to awaken the will consciousness. Finally, you will do well to add to the list the quotation from Lummis on the last page of the next section of this book. The method of procedure here is as follows: read over each selected quotation, aphorism, maxim or other affirmative statement, until you have extracted its full spirit and essence, and have caught the thought of its originator. Then carefully and thoroughly memorize it, so that you will be able to recall it readily and without undue effort. You must know it by heart as well as you do the words of your favorite song or verse. Take plenty of time for the task, but do not drop it until completed. But do not take up a second selection until you have thoroughly mastered and completed the first. After you have these affirmative selections at your command, get into the habit of recalling them to memory from time to time. Do this at any time of the day when you have a few moments to spare, while on the streetcars, while walking along the street, while waiting in the hotel lobby for someone, while waiting for your train in the station, etc. Meditate upon them, get the inspiration and power from them. Also, at night, just before going to sleep, recall these selections or statements, one at a time, and fall asleep thinking about them. If you should happen to awaken in the middle of the night, don't worry about loss of sleep, or be filled with the fear of insomnia. Instead, let your mind play with these affirmative statements, and allow your soul to bathe itself in their spirit. General suggestions concerning will training. In addition to the special examples of exercises and methods of will training which have just been recommended to you, you will find it useful to invent and to construct exercises of your own designed for the same end, or to create variations or combinations of the exercises and methods to which we have called your attention. Any and all forms of will exercises are beneficial, providing that they set before the will a clearly defined task which is not beyond the powers of the aroused will to accomplish, provided that the will sets itself earnestly to the task of accomplishing it. It is absolutely essential that the will should face the task bravely, and to determine resolutely to accomplish it fully. The exercise must also always call for effort on the part of the will, if the will is expected to benefit by it. An occasional, isolated effort benefits the will but little, repeated and reiterated effort is required. Particularly beneficial are regularly repeated efforts conducted along the lines of definite method, and calling forth the release of will power in an almost habitual manner. In such exercises, you will do well to focus your will power, and to concentrate it upon some one end. Cultivate the habit of concentrated will action in your exercises. Form a strong, definite purposeful determination, and then pour into its manifestation the whole power of your will, for the time being, let that one purposeful determination be your dominant motive, and its manifestation your chief aim in life. The successful performance of these exercises will create in you the habit of accomplishing your definite object, the custom of getting the thing done, the fashion of carrying out your determined plan. Your will, in this way, will acquire a new confidence in itself. It will acquire the habit of succeeding. It will approach more difficult tasks with a new spirit of confidence and expectation of success. A bolder and braver spirit will animate it, and it will proceed to the new and more difficult task with the spirit of the conqueror. It will have learned how to grapple with a difficult situation as earnestly as one does with a physical enemy. It will proceed to the combat with that tenacity of determination, with that fierceness of resolve, with that passion for success which a writer has well said may almost be called vindictive, in its aggressive and persistent quality. Do not let the apparent triviality of the tasks cause you to undervalue their importance in your will training. As has well been said, willpower is built up by a gradual process of practice on the smallest things, and every act of self-conquest in one sphere of life makes the battle easier in all the other spheres. Exercises of this kind, inspired by the determination to gain strength and power of will, and its definite direction and control, if persistently conducted will inevitably lead to that which you seek to gain from them. But, as a celebrated teacher has added, will exercises must be methodical and well regulated as to degree and length, or else they are perhaps worse than useless. We need scarcely remind you that there is no exclusive virtue vested in any one of the particular tasks which we have suggested for your practice and exercise. You may substitute almost any others for them, and, in fact, you will do well to use your ingenuity and powers of invention in that direction. The one thing always to be observed in this connection is that the particular special and definite principles mentioned by us must always be involved and included in your exercises. Again, you may exercise along the lines either, 1, of performing some positive actions during a certain fixed time, or else, 2, of avoiding the performance of some particular actions during such time. The one is a positive form of exercise, the other is the negative form. The new motive. When you have learned to perform the will training exercises, of the kind outlined in this section of this book, you will have made an interesting discovery concerning your feelings, impulses, desires and will action. Heretofore, you have performed your will actions solely by reason of the push or pull of some strong feeling or desire, and you have seen that all will action is caused, directly or indirectly, by feeling and desire. Now, in the performance of these exercises, you will have found that you are acting apparently without the push or pull of feeling or desire. In fact, in several of the exercises you will be actually acting against such push or pull. Then, you may well ask, what is the motive of my action? What is its motive cause? Here, at this point, you make the discovery in question. You will find that you have aroused within yourself the will feeling, the will desire, the will impulse, those strange emotional states which are satisfied and contented solely by the exercise of the will for the mere sake of willing, without regard to the intrinsic value of the act. You here make the acquaintance of the will to will, that unique mental state which seems to arise at the very center of your mental being, deeper than any feeling, any emotion, any desire, any impulse. Here is the will willing to will, moved only by will, and gratifying only will. This strange mental state is definable only in its own terms, there is nothing else with which to compare it, nothing with which to define it. It must be experienced in order to be understood, but once experienced, it will never be forgotten by you. If you are interested in this newly discovered mental state which, at least we trust, you have already found manifesting in yourself, we strongly advise you to consider carefully the next following section of this book. In it you will find your new feeling and consciousness indicated in further detail. If you have not already made this interesting and important discovery in yourself, you may now be on the verge of it. If so, the reading of the following section entitled, Will Consciousness, may perhaps hasten the hour of your deliverance, and make easier your new birth into dynamic will power. The man or woman who experiences will consciousness is reborn in will, this time into the world of the will to will, in which the mastery of will is the normal condition and the habitual state. Will consciousness. That there is a state of consciousness which may be called the will consciousness, a state in which the will becomes conscious of its own existence, its powers, its possibilities, is a fact thoroughly attested by the actual experience of many individuals. Yet to those who have not as yet entered into this conscious experience there is no way of proving the validity of such experience, and, indeed, no words adequate to express or define it fitly. The experience of will consciousness is akin to that experience of full self-consciousness which comes to many persons at some time in life, but which remains but a name to others. Or, again, it is akin to that dawn of the aesthetic sense which often suddenly bursts into consciousness in favored individuals, enabling them to experience beauty as with a new sense, and which when once experienced, can never be entirely forgotten or lost. But, on the other hand, will consciousness is different from those two somewhat analogous experiences. Those particular experiences are characterized respectively, by a sense of individual existence and real being, in the first case, and by a sense of added perception, in the second case. Will consciousness, however, is characterized by the recognition of self-power, realization of self-action, and manifestation of freedom of expression, accompanied by the thrill of the feeling of self-mastery, by the inner certainty of mastery over outer things, which arises from the consciousness of the possession of these self-powers. In the full state of will consciousness, the awareness of power, freedom and ability to act, is accompanied by a peculiar feeling, which is most difficult to describe, but which is quite apparent to those who have experienced it in even a faint degree. Some psychologists have called it will feeling, for want of a better name. This will feeling is experienced in every true will action, but reaches the stage of emotion only when the will wills to will for the sake of willing, particularly when in doing so it sets aside the strenuous push or pull of ordinary feeling and desire. In such cases, it is as if the will has ascended to a higher plane of consciousness, leaving behind it on the lower planes the feelings and desires. This will feeling will be experienced most keenly by you when you proceed to manifest your will power in the face of obstacles and hindrances. It will arouse in you the thrill of courage and daring, the enthusiasm of bravery. You will find that as you develop and train your will you will open the door to an entirely new phase of satisfying and contenting emotion, a phase which seems to develop along the lines of will development and training. It never palls upon you nor grows stale, on the contrary, it grows steadily until finally it becomes one of the dominant elements or factors of your emotional life. In its highest stages, this will consciousness will seem to wear thin the barrier which separates your individual self from what may be called the will of the all-power, that ultimate power which is the source and origin of all the power manifested in the universe. In this stage, you will at times become dimly aware of the throb of the heart of the universe, will feel its energies pulsing through your mental and spiritual arteries. At such moments you will become aware that the all is one, and each is a part, and not a part as it seemed to be. The heart of life has a single beat, pulsing through God, and Claude, and me. In this dawn of the will consciousness there will come to you a sense of joy, and of a peace which, indeed, passeth all understanding. The will consciousness cannot be purchased with money, neither can it be acquired as a gift from others. It must be acquired by work and exercise, by a steadfast development of your own inherent powers. You learn to will only by willing, and you acquire will consciousness only by willing to will. By your own efforts you must arouse the sleeping giant within yourself, and by your own efforts you must awaken him to a conscious realization of his own existence and power. When you have done this, then some day it will suddenly dawn upon you that this giant will is really yourself, your greater self which has swallowed up the old partial manifestation of selfhood which you formerly regarded as yourself. From the very dawn of will consciousness, you will become aware that you are a master, and no longer a slave. You will experience the sense of freedom and independence, and will be able to see what a puppet-like creature you formerly were. Having escaped from the control of the lesser desires and impulses, by having entered into the spirit of the greater, you will find that these lesser desires and impulses now will rally around your standard, will give you allegiance, will swear fealty to you, from the moment you have conquered them, they will become your eager and earnest servants. Despise not these lesser elements of feeling, desire and impulse, they will prove useful servants to you, so set them to work for you. It is found that feeling, impulse and desire, like fire, are good servants, though poor masters. Remember the old aphorism, all things are good enough to be used by you, but no thing is good enough to use you. It is a platitude that he who gains self-mastery attains to the mastery of others, but only when you have developed will power and attained will consciousness are you able to read the full meaning in these old and familiar words. Only then will you perceive the truth of the teachings of the ancient occult sages who held that you may exert the mastery over other persons and things, even over wild beasts and natural forces. You must first have gained the mastery over the rebellious elements of your own nature which have usurped the throne which rightfully is your own. When you have conquered the inner forces, you have acquired the right to control the outer forces. When you have deposed the usurpers of your kingdom, and have seated yourself upon the inner throne of your own mental and spiritual being, then will you be able to issue your edicts to the outer kingdom over which you have sovereignty. When you have tamed and mastered the menagerie of wild beasts within yourself, then will you be able to master and control the wild beasts in others. So said the ancient teachers, the best modern thought sustains the doctrine. There is a serious side to this attainment, however, which you must not fail to recognize and to heed. In attaining this reward of will power and will consciousness, you will find in your hands a mighty instrument for good or for evil. There will come to you at times a sense of tremendous responsibility for the proper use of this newfound power. The greater the degree of power attained by you, the greater is the responsibility. Your resolutions will lose their former character of impermanency and ineffectiveness, they will take on the character of permanent, effective forces. They will become deeply rooted in and strongly attached to reality, they will become terribly sincere and real, at times you may actually experience awe when you contemplate them. At times, there may come to you the temptation to regard yourself as apart from other men who have not as yet attained the heights reached by you. These other men will show that they recognize something different in you, and will fail to understand you. They may even feel more or less uncomfortable in your presence, and will be apt to regard you as cold, unsympathetic, or even as lacking in some of the qualities of humanity, this because you have risen above some of the common weaknesses of humanity in its present stage of development and evolution. You will find yourself, in a sense, living ahead of your time. There will be manifest in you the prophecy and the dawning spirit of the Superman. Be not unduly affected by these things, keep in touch with the world as it is, retain your sympathy with mankind as it is, and, above all, keep your feet on the ground of practical everyday life in the present, and be not tempted to soar up to the region of the clouds, one plane at a time, remember. You will discover that when you have developed and trained your will, when you have acquired will power, and have attained the will consciousness, you will have become more truly an individual than you were before. You will have become a master of destiny, instead of remaining a slave of circumstance. You will know what you can do, and you will do it. You will be able to do what you will, and to will that which you do. You will have mastered both impulse and lethargy, you will have reached the golden mean between the two extremes. You will possess and use energy, yet will not needlessly and uselessly waste or dissipate it. You will be able to begin a task, to continue it as far as is necessary, and to discontinue it when wisdom dictates that course. You will be able to proceed just as far as is required, yet will be able to stop at that point and not take an unnecessary step. You will also find that you have no inclination to err and display your newfound power for the edification or mystification of others. You will possess that certain sense of inherent power which will cause you to rise above such weaknesses and vain displays. The truly strong man does not boast of his strength and power, neither does he vaingloriously strive to exhibit it. You will be aware that others recognize the power within you, and are influenced by it, yet that very sense of the possession of certain power will tend to inhibit you from boasting about, or making a needless display of it. You will realize that will power does not manifest itself in gritting the teeth, clenching the fists, nor protruding the chest like a pouter pigeon, or heaving the bosom like the moving picture heroine registering emotion. Likewise, you will discover for yourself that which all wise men, of all ages and all lands, have always known, i.e., that will power and will consciousness do not necessarily impart gruffness, sternness, nor harshness to their possessor. True will power frequently screens itself with an exterior of suavity and agreeableness. Many individuals of the strongest will power manifest a pleasant manner, and express a suave politeness, to such a degree that the unthinking observer may be deceived into believing that the individual has no will of his own, and that his only desire and object in life is that of being agreeable and pleasant to others. But when the opportunity and need present themselves, these individuals manifest fully and unmistakably the latent strength within themselves. The iron hand in the velvet glove is the ideal of the diplomat, and men like Talleyrand possessed this quality in a remarkable degree, as history records. The blusterers and braggarts usually are found to possess no real power. Finally, you will discover that the figurative expression in which the strong will is called the iron will is imperfect. You will find that this figure of speech does not convey the idea of that which the strongly developed and scientifically trained will really is. In its place, you will prefer to use the expression, the steel will, the will of finely tempered steel. The iron will may break under the strain of circumstances, whereas the will of steel will yield a little for the moment, only to spring back to its original position and form when the pressure is withdrawn. The steel will bends at times, rather than to allow itself to be broken, but it always springs back, in true form, and resumes its action inspired by purposeful determination. The steel will bends, but it never loses its shape, form or strength. Its purpose may be frustrated temporarily, but it is never permanently defeated. In fact, the energy of its rebound and springing back often serves to accomplish the desired end and purpose. Think of your will as being like the thoroughly tempered, fine, strong Damascus blade which bends and springs back when necessary, but which is never broken nor bent out of shape, rather than as the iron bar which breaks under pressure, or else is bent out of shape. Summing up the discoveries made by you when you have developed and trained your will power to that degree in which you have experienced at least the dawn of will consciousness and the will to will, you will find that you have acquired the following qualities, attributes, and powers. I. The consciousness of pure will within yourself. 2. The habit of employing that will with directness, efficiency, and scientific accuracy. 3. The knowledge of an inexhaustible mine of inner resources, power, and ability to act with purposeful determination. 4. The power to will for the sake of will consciousness. V. The power of manifesting or inhibiting will action by will. Better than all, you will have discovered that at the very center and heart of your will, on the very throne of will, you, yourself, abide as the sovereign king. When you have reached the ultimate stage of will consciousness, lo! Will itself will seem to have disappeared, and you alone will remain, then the will be seen to have become the acting part of yourself. Well says Emerson, there can be no driving force, except through the conversion of the man into his will, making him the will, and the will him. We know of no better words to pass on to you as the keynote of what we have sought to teach you in this section than the statement of Charles F. Lummis, who summed up in the following words the result of his own experience of a life of conflict in which he emerged a victor over strong odds. The great lesson all this has taught me is that man was meant to be, and ought to be, stronger and more than anything that can happen to him. Circumstances, fate, luck, are all outside, and if he cannot change them, he can always beat them. If it had not worked its way into my broken brain that Captain I held the fort, that the only key was my own will, and that unless I willfully surrendered nothing could take the citadel, I should have been dead long ago. I am all right. I am bigger than anything that can happen to me. All these things are outside my door, and I've got the key. Will atmosphere. The individual in whom the will consciousness has been unfolded and manifested, he who has learned how to will, is usually found to have unconsciously developed that peculiar aura, field of emanation, or whatever else it may be called, which is known to close students of the subject as the will atmosphere. The will atmosphere is like the field of induction of the strong magnet, the forces of which influence the particles of iron or steel within its limits. The will atmosphere of the will-conscious individual exerts a subtle but most powerful influence over those with whom he comes in contact. In some strange way the other persons coming within the field of induction of such an individual instinctively recognize the power latent within his region of will, and they consciously or unconsciously adapt themselves to it. We wish here to illustrate this principle of will atmosphere by citing several celebrated cases in which the force in question has been manifested in a striking manner. For some of these illustrations we are indebted to Dr. J. Milner Fothergill, who, a number of years ago, gathered together many instances and examples of will power and included them in a work upon the subject which we believe to be now out of print. First of all, we shall ask you to consider that striking illustration given by Oliver Wendell Holmes, which Fothergill prefaces with the following comment. The steady conflict of the I is familiar to many of us. The boy looks at his mother to see if she is in earnest in her threat. When older he likewise looks at his schoolmaster to read his purpose. Two men or women look at each other steadily, no word is said, the conflict is soon over, and one walks ahead of the other ever after. The instance related by Holmes is stated by him as follows: the Kohinoor's face turned so white with rage that his blue-black mustache and beard looked fearful seen against it. He grinned with wrath, and caught at a tumbler, as if he would have thrown its contents at the speaker. The young Marylander fixed his clear steady eye upon him, and laid his hand on his arm, carelessly almost, but the jewel felt it was held so that he could not move it. It was no use. The youth was his master in muscle, and in that deadly Indian hug in which men wrestle with their eyes, over in 5 seconds, but breaks one of their two backs, and is good for 80 years and 10. One trial enough, it settles the whole matter, just as when two feathered songsters of the barnyard, game and dunghill, come together. After a jump or two at each other, and a few sharp kicks, there is an end of it, and it is, après vous, monsieur, with the beaten party in all the social relations for all the rest of his days. Fothergill relates with relish the celebrated instance of the meeting of Hugo, Bishop of Lincoln, and Richard Coeur de Lion, in the church of Roche-d'Andely. In this case, Richard, being involved in war with Normandy, demanded more supplies of his barons. The Bishop of Lincoln refused to supply any men, holding that the See of Lincoln was bound to military service only when the war was waged within the 4 seas of Britain. Richard, a man of very strong will, was incensed by the refusal of the bishop, and summoned the latter to Normandy. When the bishop reached Normandy, he found that the king was furiously enraged with him. Mutual friends advised him to send a conciliatory message to the king before venturing to enter his presence. But the bishop declined the advice, and preferred to trust to his own sense of awakened will consciousness. The king was sitting at mass when the prelate walked up to him and, despite the monarch's frown, said, "Kiss me, my lord king." The king turned away his face. Hugo shook him, and repeated his request. "Thou hast not deserved it," growled the king fiercely. "I have," returned the undaunted prelate, shaking the king by the shoulder even still harder. The king yielded, the kiss was given, and the bishop passed calmly on to take part in the service. Fothergill adds, mere indifference to death could never have produced such a result. There was something more. As well as being utterly fearless, Bishop Hugo possessed a will-power of most unusual character, of which several instances are on record. Not only did he face the king and justify his refusal to supply men in the council chamber afterwards, he went further, and rebuked the king for infidelity to his queen. The lion was tamed for the moment. The king acknowledged nothing, but restrained his passion, observing afterwards, "If all bishops were like my lord of Lincoln, not a prince among us could lift his head against them." Such is the story as told by Froude. Yet Richard was the last man to permit a liberty to be taken with him, as his whole history showed. This, however, was not the only instance in the career of Hugo in which he showed that his will power was capable of dominating that of his king. An earlier king, Henry Plantagenet, who, indeed, had made Hugo the Bishop of Lincoln in the first place, went down in defeat before the bishop's willpower, as truly as did his successor. King Henry preferred a request for a favor to be bestowed by the bishop upon a certain courtier. His request was bluntly refused. Hugo had already braved the wrath of the king, and the monarch was very angry at him. Henry was with his suite in Woodstock Park, and sat down on the ground pretending to be mending his leather glove when the bishop approached him. The king took no notice of his spiritual peer. After a brief pause, Hugo, pushing aside an earl, sat down by the king's side. Watching the royal proceedings, he remarked, "Your Majesty reminds me of your cousins at Falaise." Falaise was a place famous for its leather works, and it was there that Duke Robert met Arlotta, the tanner's daughter, the mother of William the Conqueror, King Henry's ancestor. The reference to his humble ancestry was too much for the king, who was badly worsted in the discussion which followed. Fothergill says, a similar character is presented to us in General Gordon. It was not his absolute indifference about his life which gained him his ascendancy. In China, where life is held to be of little or no moment, the absence of any fear of death would go but little way, and it did not constitute the basis of Chinese Gordon's ascendancy. His secret lay elsewhere. Nor did his supremacy in the Sudan rest upon his bravery, for the Arabs of the Sudan are as brave as any warriors in the world, as the history of their conflicts testify. When Gordon took a chair and sate himself down by King John of Abyssinia, or presented himself alone to the Arab sheiks who had sworn to take his life, it was not his disdain of death alone which carried him through both perils unharmed, or enabled him to hold Khartoum. Equally implicit confidence in the protection of heaven has not saved others when in peril. All the faith of Savonarola only led him to a horrible death amidst torturing flames. But without this indifference to their fate, neither Bishop Hugo nor General Gordon could have come unscathed out of the terrible dangers they deliberately chose to meet. Any fear of death certainly would emasculate any man under these circumstances. The willpower must be accompanied by personal courage when danger to life has to be encountered. The heroism of the Jesuits, who labored among the Red Indians early in the history of Canada, was sustained by their devotion, for many suffered terrible cruelties. But no one of them ever possessed in a higher degree that willpower which compels the obedience of others than did La Salle, the pioneer of the Mississippi. In George Washington we see a splendid illustration of that power which molds other men, and compels them to follow its behests. His patient sagacity rested on the basis of his willpower. A curious instance of the magnetic power of will was furnished by the story of the relations of the late Benjamin Disraeli to the Conservative Party of England. An alien, handicapped by his early avocations, at first the House refused to listen to him. Yet irresistibly he rose step by step to be a Conservative leader who educated his party, and at last was Prime Minister with a solid array of the best-bred Norman-descended patricians of England at his back, yielding ready obedience to his wishes, a leader of men, too, deeply imbued with traditions, and also a personal friend of his sovereign. Here what is meant by the words, "By faith ye shall move mountains," was illustrated vividly. The House of Orange has furnished some striking examples of the effect of willpower. William the Silent held his followers together by an iron will that bent under no catastrophe, no disaster. It refused to submit. A like character was that of William, afterward King of England. Men who disliked him did his bidding. He inspired the dispirited allies with his own resoluteness. When his schemes were foiled by a defeat, he immediately set to work to repair his losses, and deprive the French of the fruit of their victory. That the House of Orange possessed many grand characteristics will be readily admitted, but no one of their endowments is more remarkable than their willpower. The peculiar commanding power of leaders, no matter whether regular like John Churchill, or that of a guerrilla chief like Mina, in the Peninsula War of Spain, of the Red Indian Pontiac, who imperiled the existence of the Anglo-Saxons on the American continent, or even the Negro commander Toussaint Louverture, seems not to depend upon ability only, but on character in which the willpower is a leading factor. Men with marked willpower come to the front in emergencies, as seen in Oliver Cromwell, the Van Grazer, and Napoleon Bonaparte, the artillery subaltern. In both these instances national convulsions produced the seething cauldron from whence they rose, each to an eminence of position and fame. They were heavily handicapped by their early position, yet they rose superior to it. But amidst all these men there rises up a woman even more remarkable than they, the village maiden Joan of Arc, who inspired courage into the beaten warriors of France, and led them to victory. In what lay her witchcraft, for which she was finally burnt? In her capacity to animate others, which was really based on her willpower. The case of Disraeli, mentioned above by Fothergill, is a typical instance of the possession of that something, combined willpower and will atmosphere, which distinguishes individuals in whom the will consciousness has been awakened and developed. When he first arose to speak in the House of Commons, he was jeered and derided, the House would have none of him. Upon this occasion he hurled at his opponents that remarkable prophecy, I have begun several times many things, and I have often succeeded at last, and though I may sit down now, the time will come when you will hear me. And that time did come, and before long, too. Fothergill says of this, the time came, sure enough, when the House not only listened to him, but even acknowledged his mastery over it. Disraeli had learned, what many another man learns, that because he failed at first it does not follow that ultimate success is unattainable. The baffled speaker eventually came to hold the House spellbound with his barbed shafts of rhetoric. He soon attacked fiercely Sir Robert Peel, who was an excellent speaker, and the pungency of his remarks taught the House to dread him, the one at whom they once had scoffed. It must have needed great resolution to face the House of Commons again after that first terrible rebuff, but after the attempt had once been made, the rest was comparatively easy. Disraeli's subsequent career furnishes one of the most striking examples of the power of the individual to overcome apparently insurmountable obstacles by sheer force of willpower. Step by step he advanced in face of opposition sufficient to have dismayed any ordinary man. At last, he, Disraeli the Jew, became Prime Minister of England and the actual ruler of the destinies of a great part of the world. This man has thrilled the souls of several later generations of courageous and ambitious men, not only by the force of his example, but also by those remarkable words of his which we have already quoted in this book, but which we wish here to impress still more forcibly upon your memory. I have brought myself by long meditation to the conviction that a human being with a settled purpose must accomplish it, and that nothing can resist a will which will stake even existence itself upon its fulfillment. Not only the history of warfare, and that of statesmanship, are filled with recitals of instances in which willpower, will consciousness, will atmosphere have won the day, the history of business likewise is rich in instances and examples of this kind. A study of the life histories of the great captains of industry, of the men who have arrived in the various fields of business life, will convince any unprejudiced reader that there exists a something which exerts its forces and energies in favor of the individual possessing it. A still closer analysis will reveal the fact that that something has will power at the very heart and center of itself, is possessed of the will consciousness, and manifests the will atmosphere. Fothergill gives us many typical instances of this kind which he noted in his study of the history of English manufacturers. We shall give you in brief form a statement of several of the most typical of these cases cited by him. A study of these and similar cases serves to awaken the perhaps dormant will power in the reader, and also illustrates the general principle now under consideration by us. Josiah Wedgwood was the youngest of 14 children, bred and born a potter. At that time the pottery business of England was limited to a very common earthenware. The fine pottery now produced is largely the result of the pioneer work performed by this one-time little delicate lad. He was apprenticed to the trade, but was handicapped by illness which made him lame in his right knee, and which finally resulted in the amputation of his right leg. Crippled as he was, he worked away. Gladstone afterward said of him that his physical disability sent his mind inwards, and drove him to meditate upon the laws and secrets of his art. By adding silica to the dye, he succeeded in making a white ware instead of the dirty-colored products hitherto made. Then he began to experiment along the lines of perfecting his glazes. Then he had to erect his furnaces. Then came the art taste. He paid large sums for old examples of artware, and copied these accurately. Then he rediscovered the lost art of painting on biscuitware practiced by the old Etruscans, and then employed Flaxman as his artist. He worked for the throne and became the royal potter. He not only advanced himself, but also made of his part of England a great high-grade pottery producing centre Wedgwood furnishes a typical example of the man handicapped by nature, facing great obstacles, meeting with many discouragements, but in the end triumphing by means of the consistent application of his will power. In him the will consciousness had been awakened, he had the will atmosphere highly developed, according to the testimony of those of his own times. The story of Lister and silk waste also furnishes an illustration of the general principle under consideration. Lister's attention was directed to what was known as silk waste, i.e., the waste made from the manufacture of neat silk and pierced cocoons, and which looked like mutilated ropes, dirty flocks, or mucilaginous hemp, and was knotted and sticky and choked with sticks and leaves and dead silkworms. For many years he struggled with the problem of converting this unpromising waste stuff into available silk material. He battled with circumstances, and repeatedly faced utter financial ruin in the attempt. At one time he was out of pocket no less a sum than $1,500,000, the fortune previously made by him in other ventures. His indomitable will, his unflagging energy, his persistent endeavors, alone carried him through and converted defeat into victory. In the end, he succeeded in manufacturing silk velvets, velvets with a silk pile and cotton back, silk carpets, imitation sealskin, plush velvet ribbons, corded ribbons, sewing silks, Japanese silks, poplins, etc., from the once despised silk waste. When, in after years, a statue to Lister was unveiled at Bradford, England, an eminent speaker said, "What is it especially we are honoring? It is the pluck which this man has shown, it is the feeling that he said to himself, here is something which ought to be done, I will not rest until I have found out how it can be done, and having found out how it can be done, where is the man who will stop me doing it?" A writer in relating the story of Josiah Mason, the English manufacturer who started in business at the age of 8 years, peddling cakes on the street, and who when he died was one of Great Britain's great commercial giants, says of the subject of his sketch, Mason had, to begin with, a strong, powerful, almost irresistible will. That which he wanted, he would have, and in a great measure he did have. Little or great, all objects or purposes came within the range of his powerful will. And whatever or whoever he opposed, he surely conquered in the end. Not that he was blindly obstinate, or unwilling to take counsel. Another great quality which he possessed, very helpful to the accomplishment of his will, was absolute patience. He knew how to wait. With patience there went in close union a wonderful perseverance. Mason was remarkably tenacious. He held firm to his purpose, and worked it out with never-ceasing vigilance and energy. He was the embodiment of living will power. Illustrations and examples of this kind might be multiplied indefinitely. The story is the same, no matter of whom it is told, or what may be the native land of that person. It becomes certain to the student of the subject that some great, general, universal principle is back of and under these manifold instances. There is always evident the presence and power of that something which is manifesting as will power, will consciousness, will atmosphere. The matter is raised out of the category of mere coincidence by the overwhelming number of the cases in which the principle is found operating. It is seen to be the result of an invariable process of cause and effect, of the law of causation operating on the plane of mentality. We believe that the principles and methods which we have set forth in the pages of the present book will serve to point out to the earnest, persistent, courageous individual the road which must be traveled by him in his journey toward attainment by will power. We believe that in the statement of the master formula is to be found the secret of success. Let us repeat it to you once more in its popular form. Here it is: you may have anything you want, provided that you, 1. Know exactly what you want, 2. Want it hard enough. 3. confidently expect to obtain it, 4. Persistently determined to attain it, and 5. Are willing to pay the price of its attainment. Reread the several instances of success through willpower related in the foregoing pages of this section, and consider them in the light of the master formula of attainment above stated. You will see that in each and every case the successful individual has, first, known exactly what he wanted to do or to get, that he has then wanted it hard enough, that he has firmly believed in and confidently expected to get or to do it, that he has persistently determined to get or to do it, and, finally, that he has always been willing to pay the price of the will atmosphere attainment or achievement. In each case there has been that marked manifestation of 1. Ideals, 2. Desire, 3. Faith, 4. Will, and 5. Service. Let us close by quoting the following truths from the writing of Dr. Fothergill, that esteemed pioneer in the work of recording the principles and practice of willpower, and whose work has served as at least a part of the foundation structure of all who have followed him. He says, "Willpower is seen in the man who bides his time, who knows how to wait, which involves the when and the why. Circumstances may stand in his way, and he must wait, but the will is neither bent, broken, nor warped by that fact, and is all along as assertive as ever, even when apparently in abeyance. Yet willpower is not mere perseverance, it is something more. It is an entity in itself. Subconscious power, your secret forces. Your secret forces. In this book you are asked to consider some wonderful phases of your personal power, that personal power which is the expression and manifestation through you of that great principle of all power from which all phases and forms of power proceed, and in which all such are contained. This principle is known in this instruction as power. In several of the other volumes of this series of instruction upon the subject of personal power, we have asked you to consider those particular phases of your personal power which are known, respectively, as creative power, desire power, faith power, will power, etc. While in nearly all of those books occasional reference has been made to the activities of the subconscious planes of mind and will, their primary subject matter has been that which is concerned chiefly with the respective processes of the several phases of mental activity manifesting on the planes of ordinary consciousness. In the present book, on the contrary, you are asked to consider those comparatively little-known activities of the mind and will which lie outside of and beyond the field of ordinary consciousness, but which exert a tremendous influence over the activities of that region, and which to a great extent supply that realm with the material of ideas, mental images, and emotional states. While the mental planes lying outside of and beyond the field of ordinary consciousness have been until recent years comparatively unexplored by psychologists, and in fact have been almost entirely ignored by Western psychology until modern times, the best thought of the present time is in practical agreement upon the fact that on those hidden planes of mentality are performed the major portion of our mental work, and that in their field are in operation some of the most important of our mental processes. The exploration of these obscure regions of the mind has been one of the most fascinating tasks of modern psychology, and the mines have yielded rich material in abundance. Many mental phenomena formerly either denied as impossible by the orthodox psychologists, or else regarded by the average person as evidence of supernatural agencies and forces, are now seen to fit perfectly into the natural order of things, and to operate according to natural law and order. Not only have such investigations resulted in a greater increase of the scientific knowledge concerning the inner workings of the mind, but they have also served to place in the hands of the more advanced psychologists the material which they have turned to practical and efficient use by means of scientific methods of application. The effect of these discoveries has been the presentation of an important truth to the thinking individual, the truth that his mental realm is a far greater and grander land than he has heretofore considered it to be. No longer is the self held to be limited in its mental activities to the narrow field of ordinary consciousness. Your mental kingdom has suddenly expanded until it now constitutes a great empire, with borders flung wide and far beyond the boundaries of the little kingdom which you have been considering as the entire area of the field of the forces, powers and activities of the self. The self has often been likened to the king of a great mental kingdom, but, in view of the discovery of the new facts concerning the wonderful field of the unconscious, subconscious, and superconscious mental activities, the self is now more properly to be represented as a mighty emperor of a vast empire of which only a comparatively small portion has as yet been explored. You are being called upon to appreciate more fully the ancient aphorism, "You are greater than you know." Yourself is like a new Columbus, gazing at the great new world which it has discovered around itself, and of which it is the owner and the ruler. The writers on the subject of the realm of the subconscious mentality, being impressed by the vastness of this new empire of the self, have exercised their imaginations in the direction of supplying familiar illustrations borrowed from the world of concrete material things. It is astonishing to discover how close is the analogy furnished by certain of these illustrations and figurative symbols. We ask you to consider the following symbolic representations in order that your mind may more readily grasp the great truths involved in these new discoveries concerning the realm and power of the subconscious mentality. Some writers have compared the subconscious and the conscious regions of the mind to the visible and invisible portions of the solar spectrum. Science informs us that the visible portion of the solar spectrum, with its red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet rays, is bounded on its lower side by a region of infrared rays, and on its upper side by a region of ultraviolet rays, these invisible fields of light extending almost indefinitely in either direction. These hidden rays are invisible to our unaided eyes, but are recorded by delicate scientific instruments. The larger part of the heat rays emanating from the sun is invisible to us, and forms a portion of the infrared field of the solar spectrum. Likewise, the major portion of the chemical changes in the vegetable world, upon which depend the life and growth of the plants, results from the action of the ultraviolet rays which are invisible to our unaided eyes, but which our scientific instruments faithfully record. The most powerful rays of light, those which produce the most marked effects upon living creatures, are the invisible ultraviolet rays, the rays of dark light as they have been fancifully styled. Other writers have compared the conscious and subconscious planes of mentation to a small luminous circle, surrounded by a great ring of twilight, and, beyond this, an indefinite darkness, the events occurring in that twilight region, and in that night region, being quite as real as those occurring within the luminous circle. Others still have likened the mind of man to the earth, with its great underlying deposits of coal and oil, in which slumber latent light, heat and other forms of potential energy, force and power, awaiting but some appropriate stimulus to bring to the surface the materials from which those forces may be released. Ignoring to a great extent the disputes and differences on the part of the psychologists concerning the most appropriate names and terms to be employed in the consideration of the out-of-consciousness fields of mental activity and work, and brushing aside as non-essential the distinctions and differentiations between the various phases of these activities, we shall in this instruction embrace the entire field and its activities under the general term of the subconscious. Employing the term, the subconscious, to indicate the entire field of activities of the mind which are performed below, above, or in any way outside of the field or plane of the ordinary consciousness of the individual, we soon discover that the activities of the subconscious extend over a very wide range of manifestation, and embrace a great variety of forms of expression. In the first place, the subconscious presides over the activities of your physical organism. It is the animating spirit of your physical processes. It performs the manifold tasks of digestion, assimilation, nutrition, elimination, secretion, circulation, reproduction, in short, all of your vital processes. Your conscious mentality is thus relieved of these great tasks. Again, the subconscious supervises the performance of your instinctive actions. Every action that you perform automatically, instinctively, by habit, by heart, and without conscious employment of thought and will, is really performed by your subconscious mentality. Your conscious mentality, thus relieved of this work, is able to concentrate upon those other tasks which it alone can perform. When you learn to perform an action, by heart, or by habit, the conscious mentality has turned over this particular work to your subconscious. Again, the subconscious is largely concerned with the activities of your emotional nature. Your emotions which rise to the plane or level of consciousness are but the surface manifestations of the more elemental activities performed in the depths of the ocean of the subconscious. Your elemental and instinctive emotions have their source and home in the subconscious. They have accumulated there by reason of habit, heredity, or racial memory. Practically all the material of your emotional activities is stored on the planes and levels of the subconscious. Again, the subconscious presides over the processes of memory. The subconscious planes or levels of the mind constitute the great storehouse of the recorded impressions of memory. Moreover, on those planes or levels is performed the work of indexing and cross-indexing the memory records, by means of which subsequent recollection, recognition, and remembrance are rendered possible. These regions of your subconscious mentality contain not only the recorded impressions of your own personal experience, but also those racial memories or inherited memories which manifest in you as instinct, and which play a very important part in your life. Again, the subconscious is able to, and frequently does, perform for you important work along the lines of actual thinking. By means of mental rumination, it digests and assimilates the materials furnished by your conscious mentality, and then proceeds to classify these, to compare them, and to proceed to form judgments and decisions upon them and from them, all below the levels of your ordinary consciousness. Careful psychologists have decided that by far the greater part of our reasoning processes are really performed on mental levels and planes outside of the field of the ordinary consciousness. Much of your creative mental work, particularly that of the constructive imagination, is performed in this way, the result afterward being raised to the levels of conscious thought. Finally, there are levels and planes above those of the ordinary consciousness, just as there are those below the latter. Just as the lower levels are largely concerned with working over the stored-up materials of the past, so these higher levels are concerned with reporting that which may be considered to represent the future conscious activities of the human race. These higher regions of the subconscious may be said to contain the seed or embryo of the higher faculties and powers which will unfold fully in the future stages of the mental evolution of the race. Many of these higher faculties and powers are even now beginning to manifest in occasional flashes in the minds of certain individuals, and, as a consequence, such individuals are frequently regarded as inspired, or as possessing that indefinable quality or power known as genius. On these higher planes of the subconscious abide certain marvelous powers of the self, which powers manifest and express themselves in that which we call genius, inspiration, illumination, the exceptional mental achievements of certain intellects which stamp them as above the average. On these high planes abide and are manifested those wonderful mental activities which we attempt to explain under the term intuition. These activities, however, are not contrary to reason, though they may seem to transcend it at times. It is better to consider them as the manifestation of a higher reason. The investigation and exploration of these higher realms of the subconscious form one of the most interesting and fascinating tasks of modern psychology. Even now, the reports of the investigators and explorers are of surpassing interest, those which confidently may be looked for in the future bid fair to constitute a marvelous contribution to the pages of the history of modern scientific research. In this book we shall ask you to accompany us in an exploration of the various regions of the subconscious, those wonderful realms of your mind, from the highest to the lowest. In this new land there are valuable deposits of material useful to you and to all mankind. It is our purpose to point out these to you, and to instruct you in the most approved methods of mining and converting them to practical uses. You are not specially interested in the history of the explorations of the early travelers in this realm, nor in their conflicting theories and their technical terms, nor in their claims of priority of discovery. If we judge you rightly, you are interested chiefly in the matter of being led directly to the mines containing these rich deposits, and in being told just how to conduct the mining operations and the converting processes. In this spirit, then, our journey of exploration shall be conducted. The secret forces of the great subconscious, like all other great natural forces, may be harnessed and pressed into service by you. Like electricity, they may be so managed and directed into the proper channels that they may be set to work by and for you. You have been employing these forces, to a greater or less extent, in very many of your mental activities, but, in all probability, you have been employing them instinctively and without a full knowledge of the laws and principles involved in them. When you understand just what these forces are, how they work, and the methods best calculated to produce efficient results and effects, then you may proceed to employ subconscious power them intelligently, deliberately, and with conscious purpose and intent, end and aim. The average man employs but about 25% of his subconscious power. The man who understands the principles and methods to which we have just referred will be able to employ 100% of his available subconscious power. This means that he will be able to increase fourfold his subconscious mental work and activity, with correspondingly increased results and effects. Inasmuch as at least 75% of man's mental processes are performed on the plane or level of the subconscious, it will be seen that the benefits arising from quadrupling his subconscious mental activities and available power are almost beyond the power of adequate calculation. This increased power and efficiency, moreover, are not obtained at the cost of increased effort and mental wear and tear. On the contrary, the man effectively employing his subconscious relieves himself of a great portion of the mental strain incident to the employment of the conscious mentality. Subconscious mentation. For many years Western psychology held tenaciously to the theory that all there is of mind, all mental processes, all thought, all feeling, all will activity, were contained within the narrow limits of the ordinary consciousness. It held that the ordinary consciousness was identical with mind. We say Western psychology, because Oriental psychology for many centuries, for over 2,000 years in fact, had recognized the out-of-consciousness, mental planes, states and processes. In spite of the fact that many conscious mental states were perceived to be but superficial manifestations of much deeper processes, in spite of the fact that many such mental states were seen to arise from the depths of mental being lying far below the level of the ordinary consciousness, in spite of the fact that the emotional nature undoubtedly has its fundamental and elemental existence below the levels of the ordinary consciousness, these old-time orthodox psychologists held firmly to their original contention, and denounced those who ventured to express a doubt concerning it. These old-timers, it is true, found many facts which remained unexplainable under the old theory, but, like many other orthodox thinkers along other lines of thought, they took the position that the old dogmas and teachings must be supported at all costs, and that if the facts conflicted with their theories, then, so much the worse for the facts. But finally the pressure became too strong, and the younger men studying and thinking about the science of the mind began to advance tentatively the idea that perhaps there might be other regions of the mind, regions lying below the threshold of consciousness, levels or planes lying below the ordinary mental levels and planes, upon which important mental processes are performed. In spite of the continued and strenuous opposition of the orthodox psychologists, these courageous thinkers conducted extended experiments and made careful observations for the purpose of discovering the nature and the laws of these great unexplored realms of the human mind. These investigations were made for the most part by psychologists who felt that this unknown region of the mind must exist in order to explain and satisfactorily account for certain observed conscious mental phenomena. The conscious effects were before them, but the out-of-consciousness cause of these was unknown. They reasoned that if such and such effects were present, then such and such causes must also be present, although so far these causes had not been discovered. These pioneers were like the astronomers who posited the necessary existence of certain undiscovered planets by reason of the discovered actions of certain known planets, which actions were seen necessarily to be caused by the presence and influence of other planets as yet undiscovered by science. Or, changing the illustration, we may say that these advanced thinkers were like the early explorers who by reason of occasionally observing strange floating trees, animals and bodies of men in certain far distant waters, hazarded the theory that there must be an undiscovered world situated far to the west of their own world. This was the idea that inspired Columbus, and which finally led to the discovery of America. In the same scientific spirit, these pioneer psychologists sought to account for certain observed mental activities, deflections and influences upon the theory that there must exist other planes of mental activity, lying out of consciousness, which constituted the field of a wonderful activity, the results of which afterward rose to the surface of consciousness. Leibniz, the great German philosopher, was one of the first of the leading Western psychologists to advance the theory that the mind is not limited to the narrow field of the ordinary consciousness, and that there are changes occurring, energies always at work, and modifications constantly taking place in the mind, of which the ordinary consciousness is not aware. Others followed in his footsteps, until finally the large number and high standing of the advocates of the new idea forced recognition and respect for it on the part of the orthodox psychologists. Vigorously opposed, and often violently ridiculed, this great idea gradually attracted to itself strong support, and finally became an accepted doctrine in the standard Western psychology. As a straw showing how the wind of even the most conservative thought is now blowing in the direction of the general recognition of the existence of the out-of-consciousness planes or levels of mental activity, we quote the following extract from an article contained in the Encyclopaedia Britannica, 11th edition, volume 25, page 1063. The reality of modes of mental operation which may properly be called subconscious or subliminal is now generally admitted. During the last quarter of the 19th and the opening years of the 20th century, there has been accumulated a mass of observations which suffices, in the opinion of many of those best qualified to judge, to establish the reality of processes which express themselves in purposeful actions and which bear all the marks from which we are accustomed to infer conscious cognition and volition, but of which nevertheless the subject of normal personality has no knowledge or awareness other than such as may be shared by any second person observing his actions. Perhaps the greatest cause of the objection of the old-time psychologists to the idea of the subconscious, and one of the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of the understanding of the subject by the average modern layman, is that of the seemingly contradictory notion of mental activities performed without consciousness. It is indeed hard to conceive of thinking without consciousness. But subconscious or even unconscious thinking is not really thinking without consciousness, it is rather thinking on planes of consciousness other than that of the ordinary consciousness. The term unconscious, so frequently applied to the activities of the subconscious, is particularly unfortunate. It serves to bewilder the student, and to arouse uncalled for opposition in the minds of those unfamiliar with the real facts of the case. Subconsciousness is not unconsciousness, it is rather other consciousness. This is a most important distinction. We trust that you will fix it in your mind, and observe it in your thought upon the subject. The Freudian school has given great prominence to the term, the unconscious, which was originally employed by von Hartmann, in its consideration of certain important phases of the activities of the subconscious. This fact has served to add to the difficulties attached to the subject of the out-of-consciousness mental processes. But the Freudians do not intend to convey the idea that the unconscious is unknowing. On the contrary, they hold that it knows much and knows well. Dr. Wilfrid Ley, one of the clearest exponents of the teachings of Freud, says on this point, "The unconscious is not to be regarded as the unknowing part of the mind, but only as the unknown part. From one point of view, there is no such thing as the unknowing part of the mind, because the mind is essentially that part of the personality that is knowing, knowing with greater or less intensity, and knowing now one and now another object, but always knowing something, from the first day of its life until the last. But the unconscious may be described as the generally unknown realms of the ego, into the seemingly bottomless abyss of which the sensations and perceptions of the individual are constantly sinking, and from which, no matter how hard we try, we cannot, without the help which analytic psychology offers us, recover anything except a very limited amount of visual, verbal or other memories." A little further on in this section of the book we shall show just why the subconscious is the generally unknown realms of the ego. Modern psychology is able to furnish the explanation, one that is quite satisfactory when rightly understood. But before proceeding to such explanation we wish to clear away another quite frequent cause of misconception, misinterpretation and misunderstanding of the character of the real nature of the subconscious, namely the erroneous dual mind theory which to some extent has become attached to it by reason of the hasty generalizations of some of the earlier writers upon the subject. One of the great fallacies arising from the hasty generalization of some of the early investigators, teachers, and writers upon the subject of the subconscious, and one which has been quite difficult to explain away to the popular mind, is that which is generally known as the two-mind theory, or the dual-mind hypothesis. Arising from this is that associated fallacy consisting of identifying one of the hypothetical two minds with the soul, instead of regarding both of these two respective fields of mentation as particular divisions, regions, levels, or planes of mental activity, all of which are instruments of the manifestation and expression of the ego, self, or I of the individual. Frederick W. H. Myers, the English essayist and investigator of psychic phenomena, was, in 1887, the first to advance tentatively the idea of the dual mind of man. But Myers was far more conservative than were some of his followers in this respect, as will be seen from the following brief consideration of his ideas. Myers' original idea was that the self is not only a unity, but also a coordination of its several phases and powers. He held that in addition to the more commonly recognized attributes the self possesses faculties and powers unexercised and unexercisable by the consciousness that finds employment in the direction of the affairs of everyday life. At first, Myers confined his attention to the conception of a level of consciousness existing below the ordinary level or plane of everyday consciousness, below the threshold of that consciousness, as he very aptly expressed it. He employed the term, the subliminal consciousness, to indicate all that takes place beneath the ordinary threshold, or say, if preferred, the ordinary margin of consciousness, not only those faint stimulations whose very faintness keeps them submerged, but much else which psychology as yet scarcely recognizes, sensations, thoughts, emotions, which may be strong, definite and independent, but which, by the original constitution of our being, seldom merge into that supraliminal current of consciousness which we usually identify with ourselves. But later, Myers yielded to the temptation to generalize beyond conservative limits, and he thereby laid the foundations for much wild thought on the part of his later followers, thought which, by the way, Myers would undoubtedly have repudiated had he been living at the time. But even his generalization was advanced quite modestly, and tentatively, as will be seen by the following statement of it made by him at the time, perceiving that there are not only isolated subliminal processes, but that there also is a continuous subliminal chain of memory involving just that kind of individual and persistent revival of old impressions and responses to new ones, which we commonly call a self. I find it permissible and convenient to speak of a subliminal self. The following explanation made by Myers shows that, at the last, his term, the subliminal self, was employed principally for the purpose of convenience and for distinguishing between the two great planes of mental activity, rather than as a hard and fast declaration of belief in a two-mind or two-self combination of entities. I do not intend by using this term, the subliminal self, to assume that there are two correlative and parallel selves existing always within each of us. Rather, I mean that part of the self which is commonly subliminal, and I conceive that there may be, not only cooperations between these quasi-independent trains of thought, but also upheavals and alterations of personality of many kinds, so that what was once below the surface may for a time, or permanently, rise above it. And I conceive also that no self of which we can here have cognizance, is in reality more than a fragment of a larger self, revealed in a fashion at once shifting and limited through an organism not so framed as to afford it full manifestation. Another phase of the dual mind theory became quite popular for a time as the result of the theories and teachings of Dr. Thomson J. Hudson, which were first announced in his book entitled The Law of Psychic Phenomena, published in the year 1893. Dr. Hudson's original fundamental theory was that man has, or appears to have, two minds, each endowed with separate and distinct attributes or powers, each capable, under certain conditions, of independent action. It should be clearly understood at the outset that, for the purpose of arriving at a conclusion, it is a matter of indifference whether we consider that man is endowed with two distinct minds, or that his one mind possesses certain attributes and powers under some conditions, and certain other attributes and powers under other conditions. It is sufficient to know that everything happens just as though he were endowed with a dual mental organism. Under the rules of correct reasoning, therefore, I have a right to assume that man has two minds, and the assumption is so stated, in its broadest terms, as the first proposition of my hypothesis. For convenience, I shall designate the one as the objective mind, and the other as the subjective mind. But Hudson soon advanced from this comparatively modest fundamental premise. He proceeded as if the duality of the mind were an established fact, and he attributed to his hypothetical subjective mind the most wonderful powers and properties. In addition to the well-recognized subconscious mental processes, he attributed to the subjective mind certain mysterious powers which he held sufficient to account for the psychic phenomena of telepathy, hypnotism, clairvoyance, spiritistic manifestations, psychic action at a distance, psychic movement of material objects, etc. He held that the subjective mind acted without the use of the physical senses, that it was able to see at a distance, and without the natural organs of vision, that it could leave the body and travel to distant lands, that it could read the thoughts of others, and the contents of sealed envelopes and closed books, etc., etc. Finally, he announced, in other words, it is the soul. Hudson claimed that the subjective mind operated more freely and efficiently when the person is placed in a hypnotic state, and that it was, unqualifiedly and constantly amenable to the power of suggestion. That is to say, the subjective mind accepts, without hesitation or doubt, every statement that is made it, no matter how absurd or incongruous or contrary to the objective experience of the individual. In his later books, Dr. Hudson sought to establish the immortality of the soul by means of his hypothesis of the subjective mind, the latter being by him identified with the soul. He also sought to establish the divine pedigree of man by means of the same hypothesis, holding practically that divine mind must be subjective mind raised to infinity, notwithstanding that he had previously asserted that the subjective mind could be hypnotized, and that it did its best work while in that state, and that it was subconscious mentation amenable to suggestion to such an extent that it would accept without hesitation the most absurd and ridiculous statements. Hudson's theories and teachings, though extremely popular for a time, are now but seldom heard of or quoted. Their value now is generally held to consist chiefly of the great interest which they aroused in the public mind concerning the phenomena of the subconscious. The extravagances of the theory, and the wildness of many of its conclusions, have been gradually ironed out by the more thoughtful and scientific treatment of the subject by the later investigators and writers. The value of Dr. Hudson's pioneer work is gratefully acknowledged by the present-day workers along the same general lines, and much of his teaching which was at one time severely condemned by the more conservative psychologists is now seen to fit in with the newer views of the subject, and the former is properly interpreted and rightly understood and stated. We do not consider it necessary to enter here into an extended recital of the theories and teachings of the multitude of teachers and writers who followed rapidly in the footsteps of Myers and of Hudson, and who carried to an extent undreamed of by those pioneers their original comparatively conservative hypotheses of the dual self or the dual mind. While serving to attract to the general idea of the subconscious the minds of many persons who, otherwise, would never have heard of it, they often tended to repel the minds of more thoughtful persons by the mass of fantastic theory and unwarranted conclusions with which they surrounded the fundamental facts. All this, however, has now almost entirely passed away. The barnacles have been scraped from the bottom of the ship, and it is now quite easy sailing. We now hear very little of the dual mind or dual self theories. The facts which were obscured or distorted by them are now explained and accounted for by the teachings of approved modern psychology. The unity of the mind is still maintained, but even the most conservative psychologists now admit, nay, actually insist, that the mental unity has many phases, many planes, levels, and regions of manifestation and expression. Science now says, in effect, if we are called upon to postulate a separate self or mind to account for and explain each and every phase or aspect of mental activity, we shall have not 2, but 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 20, or 100 different selves, minds, or entities, on our list. The sane and logical conclusion is that the mind is unitary, one, having many phases, forms, modes or aspects of manifestation and expression, and many levels or planes, regions or realms, of activity and process. Professor Joseph Jastrow says concerning this point, it is quite misleading to think of the subconscious as a veritable, independently organized psyche, or as a subservient understudy, however partially apposite and wholly legitimate such comparisons may be as metaphorical aids. The conscious and the subconscious, if we may clothe these aspects of our mental life in substantive form, are but two souls with but a single thought, for the simple reason that they are but one soul, and the unity of their heartbeat is inherent in the organism that gives them life. It is only because the silent partner in our mental administration is only the sole head thereof in another guise, with another occupation, that his dominant habits, interests, endowments, experiences, pervade their common business. It is again because the one contributes to the joint undertaking, so largely unheard and unseen, that those who have intercourse with this concern, as indeed the director thereof himself, have little occasion to come in contact with influence and data that do not appear on the books. Now, let us return to that point of our consideration of the subconscious wherein we proceed to investigate the subject of just why the contents of that great portion of the mind is unknown to the individual. You will remember that we have told you that modern psychology is able to furnish this explanation, and that we promised you that we would furnish you with it. Here is the explanation in a nutshell. You are aware only of such contents of your mind which are within the field of ordinary consciousness. You are conscious of only such of your mental states and processes which at the moment of ordinary consciousness are included in the radius of your conscious attention. Accordingly, the field of ordinary consciousness and the field of conscious attention are identical. If your conscious attention is directed to or held by a particular object or subject, then you are conscious of that object or subject. If your conscious attention is not so directed or held by that object or subject, then you are not conscious of it. A little self-examination will reveal to you the truth of the above statement. You will see at once that you are aware or conscious at this moment of only an infinitesimal portion of the entire contents of your mind, of what you know, of what you feel, of your beliefs, of your likes or dislikes, and so on. Your mind is filled with knowledge acquired by you in your past experience, with feelings of various kinds which you have developed in like manner, with ideas, plans, designs, purposes, aims, ends, desires, longings, aspirations. You know that this is so, although at this present moment these mental states are not in your field of consciousness, your conscious attention is not directed to or held by them. The moment that you turn your conscious attention in the direction of any of these things, that moment do those things proceed to rise to the plane of ordinary consciousness and you become aware of them. This is what happens when you think about things, when you indulge in reverie, when you start into motion the stream of memory and recollection. All this is a matter of ordinary everyday experience with you, yet you may never have thought of it in just this way, nor realized the principle involved in the process. You see, there are two general kinds of knowing, as follows: 1, that knowing arising from the present consciousness of things, and 2, that knowing which consists of the knowledge which you have salted down and stored away in your mind, and this, in your mind, really means, in your subconscious. In the same way there are two general kinds of feeling, as follows: 1, the feeling which is at this moment present in your conscious attention, and 2, the feelings which you know quite well are present in your mind, although you are not at this moment aware of them. If you would obtain a clear illustrative idea of the nature of the contents of the subconscious, you need but think of the contents of your memory, for memory is one of the great phases of the subconscious. You know quite well that there is a wealth of knowledge stored away in your memory, of which you are not at this moment conscious. you know equally well that when your attention is directed to certain subjects or objects, then your memory will raise to the plane of conscious attention at least a considerable portion of your knowledge concerning those subjects. Where were those memories, where was this knowledge, before they arose into consciousness in response to directed attention? Surely they existed somewhere, but where? They existed in the subconscious just as truly as they afterward existed in your consciousness. Do you see the point? The subconscious is the great ocean of your mind, while your consciousness is but the surface activities of it. Your attention brings to the surface such contents of your mental ocean as may be called for, or drawn there, by the appropriate causes. But the attention does not create them, it merely brings them to the surface. These contents of your mind are just as really items of your knowledge, while sunk in the depths of the subconscious, as when raised to the surface. To limit your mind to your conscious states, ignoring the far greater contents of your subconscious, would be just as absurd as to limit the ocean to its surface, ignoring the wonderful body of its depths. But not only are items of knowledge stored away in this great ocean of the subconscious, wonderful mental activities and processes are constantly underway in its hidden depths. The subconscious is not a dead sea, it is a great ocean of activity. It never rests, never sleeps, it works while your ordinary surface consciousness is resting or sleeping. A great portion of your thinking is being performed there. In its realm there are mental processes underway, the end of which is to solve your problems for you, to answer your questions, to form your judgments, to work upon the materials which your conscious mentality has handed over to it instinctively. You see, your mental machine is a far more wonderful thing than you had imagined, it is something bigger than you have dreamed it to be. In the following sections of this book we shall show you the kind of mental work the subconscious is doing for you, and the still better work it is capable of doing for you when you direct it rightly. For the present, we are merely striving to awaken you to a realization of its nature and of the facts of its existence. Nature, or the power underlying nature, has wisely committed the greater portion of your mental work to the subconscious. If your conscious mentality were required to attend even to but 1,000th part of the work of the subconscious, you would have no time whatsoever to attend to the tasks and problems of your everyday conscious life. In order to allow your conscious mentality to perform its rightful tasks, nature has handed over to the subconscious the greater portion of the entire mental activities, processes, and work. You will realize this more fully as you proceed with this instruction. Dr. Wilfred Lay says, "The unconscious operates in every act of our lives, not merely in the actions ordinarily known as unconscious or automatic, but in that part of our activity to which we attribute the most vivid consciousness. For in a certain sense we are most helped or hindered by the unconscious part of ourselves when we think that we are most keenly alive. Our unconscious pervades our conduct in the most minute details, just as the air we breathe is forced by our blood through our tissues, and it might almost be said that it is as important, and as great in extent, when compared with the conscious present, as the air, so small a part of which we breathe, is in extent in proportion to the minute particles of it that we take into our lungs." Subconscious vital processes. Among the most fundamental activities of the subconscious are those which are concerned with the vital processes of the physical body, the processes of life in the living organism. Although the fact is not generally recognized, it is an established scientific truth that the subconscious controls, directs, institutes and conducts the vital processes of the body which are concerned with growth, nourishment and the general operation of the living organism. The operation of the vital processes manifested in every organ of your body is conducted by the subconscious. Every organ, every part, even every cell, is under the control and direction of the subconscious. The work of repair, replacement, digestion, assimilation and elimination, which is underway in your physical body, is performed by the subconscious. In short, your entire vital activity is under the control and direction of your subconscious, although your ordinary consciousness is not aware of this fact. Many persons, most persons in fact, if they think of the matter at all, are inclined to the general notion that the body runs itself like a machine, or rather like a clock that has been wound up and set going. So far is this from being a fact, however, that it may be stated that every action and movement of your internal organism, with the exception of the purely mechanical or chemical movements and changes, is effected by your will, the latter usually manifesting along the lines of subconscious activity. All the operations of the life forces in your body are found to result from mental action of some kind, usually subconscious mental action. It is an axiom of certain careful thinkers that all life action is mind action. In every vital process in the living organism are to be seen the presence and activity of mind in some form, some phase, some degree. As Carpenter says, the convertibility of physical forces and the correlation of these with the vital forces, and the intricacy of that nexus between mental and bodily activity which cannot be analyzed, all lead upward to one and the same conclusion, that the source of all power is mind. Bacon says, life is not force, it is combining power. It is the product and presence of mind. Dunn says, from the first movement when the primordial cell germ of a human organism comes into being, the entire individual is present, fitted for human destiny. From the same moment, life and mind are never for an instant separated, their union constitutes the essential work of our present existence. That all which is called vital force, the healing power of nature, or the vis medicatrix naturae, is but a form, phase or aspect of subconscious mental action, of the work of the subconscious, cannot be doubted even for a moment by those who have carefully investigated nature's healing processes. These processes constitute what is known as the curative efforts of nature, or the vis vita, by which terms is indicated that certain curative or restorative principle of nature which is implanted in every living, organized body, and which is constantly operative for its repair, preservation, health and well-being. Instances of the effective work of this great natural principle are seen in the respective processes manifest in cases where a finger or toe is lost by the man. Here, as a prominent medical authority has said, nature, unaided, will repair and fashion a stump equal to one at the hands of an eminent surgeon. Careful medical authorities have pointed out in their books, and in their lectures, the fact that undeniable mental action is present in the ordinary vital processes and functions. They assure us that no machine could be constructed, nor could any combination of solids and liquids in organic compounds serve, to regulate, control, counteract, help, hinder, or arrange for the continual succession of different events, foods, surroundings and conditions which are constantly affecting the body. Under no mechanistic theory can satisfactorily be explained the fact that in the midst of such ever-changing and varying succession of influences the body holds to its course of growth, health, nutrition and self-maintenance with the most marvelous constancy. It is clear, say these authorities, that such qualities as regulation, control, etc., are mental qualities rather than mechanical properties. But, they bid us note, it is equally clear that by no ordinary mental actions can we consciously exercise any of these mental powers over the organic processes of our bodies. The inevitable conclusion, they say, is that the mental powers which are seen to be operating in the body are exercised unconsciously, that our unconscious mental powers, and nothing else, control, guide and govern the functions and organs of the body. As one of these authorities says, when thoroughly analyzed, the action and regulation of no part of the body can be satisfactorily explained without postulating an unconscious mental element which does, if allowed, satisfactorily explain all the phenomena. We would call your attention here, at this point, to the fact that the bases of mind cure, mental healing, mental therapeutics, or by whatever names the various systems of mental cure of disease may be called, undoubtedly are to be found in the fact that the vital functions and processes of the body are really performed by mind operating along subconscious lines, by the subconscious, in fact. This being realized, it is seen plainly that mental healing, in each or all of its forms, is not a case of the power of mind over matter, but rather that of the influence of one phase of the mind over another phase, a case of mind over mind, in fact. The connective nerves or filaments which unite the cerebrospinal and the sympathetic nervous systems serve an important purpose in the work of mental healing, and their presence is very significant in the light of the phenomena of mental therapeutics, or faith cures, and in the well-known ordinary phases of the effect of mental states upon physical functions. They serve to explain the vital mechanism employed in the production of these interesting classes of psychophysical phenomena, and, likewise, they serve to furnish the physical explanation of the psychological processes operative in the phenomena of mental healing. That mental states produce reactions in the form of physical conditions is admitted by even the most conservative medical authorities. The most casual observer must have noted that the emotions of fear, grief, anger, worry, or joy have a most marked effect upon the physical processes of digestion, assimilation and elimination. A change of mental state is almost immediately followed by a change in physical function. Your appetite is seriously affected by the receipt of bad news, while good news imparts a new zest to the enjoyment of your meal. The sight or the recollection of the sight of a disgusting object will produce nausea, or at least will spoil your appetite. The sight or the memory of appetizing food will cause your mouth to water, and your gastric juices to flow more freely. The bad boy who stood in front of a brass band, and by means of sucking a lemon induced the saliva to flow copiously from the mouths of the musicians, thus causing their playing to come to a sudden and disastrous end, understood the practical effect of this principle, though doubtless ignorant of the real cause operating in the case. The practical joker who sets the company of persons to yawning, as the result of the mental contagion produced by his simulated yawn, understands how this principle works out in practice, though he may not realize the exact psychology or physical process involved. Experimental psychology has demonstrated that the circulation follows the attention, and that by concentrated attention directed to any part of the body one may increase the blood supply to that part. Thus, experiments have demonstrated that the blood may be sent in increased quantity to the hand, or else withdrawn from it, simply by means of concentrated attention accompanied by mental suggestion or autosuggestion, the dark red color of the hand in one case, and the pallid appearance of the hand in the other case, being sufficient evidence of the soundness of the principle. Many practitioners of suggestive therapeutics who have experimented along these lines have held that the increased supply of nerve force, accompanying the increased flow of blood sent to the several organs and parts of the body in this way, plays a most important part in many cases of mental healing. Just as the flow of the blood to any part or organ of the body may be increased by concentrating the attention upon those parts and organs, so the movements, activities and processes of the digestive organs, the organs of elimination, and even of the heart, may be influenced by employment of the attention, or by the presence of certain mental states which serve to accelerate or retard such processes as the case may be. Modern science admits that, it is positively established that suggestion or autosuggestion can and does affect the so-called involuntary functions of the body. We shall see just how and why suggestion and autosuggestion produce these effects, when we reach that particular phase of our subject a little further on in this section of the book. That the respective states of health and disease depend materially upon the character of the emotional states predominant in the subconscious mentality of the individual is now universally admitted in authoritative medical circles. Statements concerning this fact, and examples and instances illustrating it, are to be found on all sides in medical journals, textbooks, and class lectures. The following examples will suffice to illustrate the general character of the conclusions expressed in such statements concerning this matter. Drive Southworth says, if mental states can change the various secretions of the body, making them poisonous, for example, the saliva and the milk in the human breast, under the influence of anger, worry, or fear, could it not also be productive of disease through imperfect or non-elimination? Is it improbable that fear, which is a greater negative force than anger, may produce the results as indicated? Professor Elmer Gates says, my experiments show that irascible, malevolent and depressing emotions generate in the system injurious compounds, some of which are extremely poisonous, also that agreeable, happy emotions generate chemical compounds of nutritious value, which stimulate the cells to generate energy. Dr. Borton, writing of the healing of the body through mental forces, in which unhealthy conditions are transformed into healthy, normal states, says, these changes are not miraculous, but proceed from natural causes in the operation of the mind, as a therapeutic agency, operating through the functions of the body, sometimes as a tonic or stimulant, warding off diseases under the most exposed conditions, defending and holding the system in a state of health, while those devoid of these mental assurances become victims to the ravages of disease through contagion or infection. This protective force of the mind has been demonstrated many times in hospitals and other places where contagious diseases were prevailing. The mental force possesses a protective power, when rightly exercised, far beyond what is usually conceded, this, not only in the way of defense, but also in correcting diseases when in existence. The investigations of Freud and his school have served to throw new light upon many obscure mental causes of disease and abnormal physical conditions. The work of psychoanalysis is directed to a considerable extent to uncovering these causes which are hidden in the recesses of the subconscious. Briefly stated, the case is as follows: many abnormal physical conditions, and often chronic complaints, have as their primary cause a disturbance of the emotional nature arising from past experiences of an unpleasant nature, such as, for instance, real or fancied slights, injuries, injustice, frustration of cherished desires, or similar occurrences in the past life of the individual. As the years pass by, the main facts of the actual event fade from the memory, and the individual seemingly adapts himself to the conditions forced upon him. But the subconscious has not forgotten these. Instead, their memories abide in the out-of-consciousness realms, and work their evil effects. Like a hidden cancer, or like a great gnawing worm dwelling in the emotional nature of the person, the old sore persists and tends to poison his mental and physical constitution. Thus old hates, old jealousies, old fears, abide in the subconscious, producing the physical reactions which are well known to psychotherapy. It is the work of the scientific psychoanalyst to dig out these cancerous mental growths, or these psychic gnawing worms, and to bring them once more into the field of consciousness. Once brought before the conscious attention, they may be examined, analyzed, dissected, passed upon, and discarded as having no real present importance. Thereupon, they are discharged from the mental realm once and for all. By means of this cathartic process, the system is relieved of these hidden roots and causes of disease and abnormal physical conditions, and health and normal functioning once more is manifested. These and similar discoveries have served to add greatly to the efficiency of mental therapy, and to broaden its field. They verify the basic principles and theories of mind cure, and indicate improved methods of applying them. In this consideration of the subconscious vital processes, we must call your attention to three very important facts, namely, 1. That the subconscious is amenable to suggestion and autosuggestion, 2. That the subconscious tends to accept as true the ideas and statements which the conscious mentality places, or allows to be placed in it, 3. That the subconscious, after accepting a suggestion or autosuggestion, proceeds to carry the suggested idea to its logical conclusion, irrespective of its actual truth, and thereafter will tend to manifest in physical states and functioning the mental state or completed idea, the seed of which has been supplied by the suggestion or autosuggestion. Now, there is no need here for us to enter into a technical description of the psychology of suggestion. It is sufficient for our purpose to consider a suggestion as a seed idea, which is planted in the rich mental soil of the subconscious. An autosuggestion is merely a suggestion made by one to himself. It is a case of, says I to myself, says I. A plain suggestion is a seed idea, coming from an outside source, a statement from another person, a passage in a book or newspaper, a printed sign, the manner of another person, etc. All suggestion, at the last, is autosuggestion, for the reason that the individual permitting a suggestion from outside to become lodged in his subconscious really tacitly endorses it and makes it his own, just as man endorsing a check or note assumes responsibility for the paper. The result of the suggestibility of the subconscious is quite marked in the case of the subconscious vital processes. Suggestions or autosuggestions of health tend to produce conditions of health, while suggestions or autosuggestions of disease tend to produce conditions of disease. It has been said that, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Equally true, and for the same reason, is the statement that, as the subconscious thinks its owner's physical condition is or should he, so that physical condition actually becomes in time. By reason of these fundamental facts concerning the subconscious, it is easily seen how and why the seed ideas implanted in the soil of the subconscious eventually sprout, bear leaves, blossoms and the fruit of health or disease as the case may be. By means of the planting of the seed ideas of fear thought, panicky feelings, mental pictures and thoughts of diseased conditions, depressing and discouraging emotional states, coupled with the mental attitude of the expectant attention or confident expectation of the coming, or the continuance, of the physical disorder, the conscious mentality impairs and interferes with the normal action of the subconscious mental activities, quite frequently giving to them an entirely wrong direction or course of procedure. This wrong direction or course of procedure in time often becomes chronic and permanent, unless removed or else neutralized by a reversal of the method which originally brought it about. On the other hand, by energizing, animating and strengthening the subconscious mental processes by cheerful, happy, and hopeful states of mind concerning the physical condition, by inspiring emotional states and feelings, by mental pictures of healthy, normal physical conditions, rather than of the abnormal, there is aroused a strong natural power of resistance to diseased conditions, to impaired physical functioning, and to ill health in general, a strong recuperative energy, tending to prevent disease in the first place, and in the second place to restore health when it has become impaired. Avoid, as you would a pestilence, all depressing emotions and all negative mental states such as anger, fear, worry, jealousy, envy, hatred. Also avoid with equal care all expectations or beliefs that you will contract disease, even when it is raging around and about you. Refuse to allow your imagination to be filled with the negative, evil pictures of diseases or diseased conditions. Avoid, or learn to resist and throw off, the evil suggestions of others that you will contract disease or manifest diseased conditions. Shed these suggestions like the proverbial water from the duck's back, when you cannot escape from the company of persons given to the planting of such pestilential seed thoughts. Cultivate the positive emotional states of fearlessness, calmness, poise, cheerfulness, hope, faith, confidence in the powers that be in nature, or above and over nature. Form the habit of expecting and looking forward to the normal, natural conditions of health, not to the state of disease. Trust the life forces and nature to pull you through, even when you may happen to slip. Fill your mind with the ideas and mental pictures of health, and not of disease. Frequent the company of those who look forward, not backward, upward, not downward, and whose vision seeks the good rather than the evil aspects of life. Read books having this forward and upward outlook upon life. Above all, keep your mind filled with the bright, cheerful and happy mental pictures of health and normal physical conditions. Be careful to admit only the right kind of pictures to your mental picture gallery. Always see yourself as you wish to be, not as you fear that you may be. Keep ever before you the visualized ideal of health, this, no matter how much the existing conditions may strive or tend to influence you in the opposite direction. This last is important, for these ideal mental pictures are the patterns which the subconscious, which is really that which you have been thinking of as life or nature, employs in building your physical body, and in weaving the fabric of your physical functioning in conditions. This is the great principle underlying all the various schools of mental healing, faith cure, etc., even of those schools which seek to veil their teachings in metaphysical and quasi-religious terminology and dogma. The development of the depressing, negative mental weed spoils the mental garden of the subconscious, and chokes the valuable plants which should be grown there. The act of holding before the imagination or the ideative faculties the mental pictures of disease is bound in time to cause the subconscious to strive to manifest in objective physical reality the conditions presented to it in such pictures. The confident expectation, or expectant attention, of diseased or abnormal physical conditions is practically certain to cause the subconscious to proceed in the direction of making the ideal become real. The statement of Job that which I feared hath come upon me, expresses an actual fact of physiological psychology or of psychological physiology. This negative influence and condition, so imparted, permeates the organs and parts directly involved, and the cells which compose those organs and parts, as well. It also by reflex and sympathetic action and reaction of this kind, the action of the conscious mentality upon the subconscious, and the reaction of the latter upon the former, serves to break down the natural habits of resistance and self-protection with which the subconscious is endowed. As a result, chronic ill health frequently results. Here we have an actual example of the truth that, to him who hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. In such cases, the only remedy is to halt the progress of the downward swing of the subconscious activity, and to reverse the process by transmuting the activity into an upward, positive manifestation. The latter, however, is equally cumulative, the action and reaction proceeding in the direction of health, so that we have an actual example of the companion truth that, to him who hath, shall be given. The rule works both ways, as all good rules are said to do. Finally, you will do well to remember the old adage that which will make a sick man well, will keep a well man well, that which will cure disease, will prevent disease. Therefore, you are strongly urged to acquire, cultivate and maintain the positive, uplooking, forward-looking mental attitude, even in the days of your most perfect health. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You should determine to adhere faithfully to the ideal of health, to cultivate the habit of holding firmly to the mental pictures of health, and to beware of allowing that ideal and those mental pictures to become weakened, dimmed, clouded or hidden by adverse autosuggestions on your own part, or by the acceptance, tacitly or actually, of similar suggestions arising from the remarks, views, beliefs or negative mental attitudes of other persons, or from other sources. This, then, is the part played by your subconscious in the matter of the direction and control of your physical functions and processes. You have at your disposal the wondrous powers of the subconscious which you may direct to the work of maintaining or restoring your health. All that you have thought of as nature, or as the life forces, in their healing and life-maintaining processes, all that you have thought of as the healing power outside of yourself, all this is really your own subconscious, a part of yourself, though a part perhaps not recognized or realized by you up to this time. If through ignorance you have given these powers a wrong direction, you have now at your disposal and under your command a positive, upward, health-giving aggregate of forces. Finally, remember that your subconscious is always your friend. Once let it realize what is necessary for your physical well-being, once plant the right kind of seed ideas in its soil, and it will bend every energy within it toward manifesting and expressing health in you. Rightly understood and interpreted, the principles which we have just announced to you will make clear and plain to you that something in it, which you have always intuitively felt might be found in mind cures, underlying their technical and sometimes fantastic theories and methods. You have here the stuff that does the work which has been hidden in the various capsules offered you by the several schools, cults, and teachers. The verbal capsules serve to disguise the real stuff, and to make it more attractive to the imagination. Any verbal form that appeals to the mental taste or to the imagination will serve the purpose. The highly exploited verbal formulas, the miraculous statements of truth, the wonder-working affirmations of the various schools, all these are but the verbal capsules in which are concealed the real stuff of autosuggestion or suggestion. Anything that will arouse the mental state of active, confident expectation, or which will create a strong mental picture of the desired result or condition will do the work. If you will analyze the various verbal formulas by means of which mind cures are made, you will always discover that autosuggestion or suggestion abides at their very heart and center. The positive mental picture accompanied by the mental state of faith, confident expectation, or expectant attention, will give to the subconscious the desired mental pattern to be materialized into objective reality, and the aroused faith or confident expectation will set the machinery of the subconscious into activity. We note at the time of the present writing that a retired chemist of Nancy, France, is working miracles of healing in England. His formula is simply the continued repetition of the French words "c'est passé," meaning going, going, going. The patients are filled with the idea that their diseases are going, going, and the repeated autosuggestion produces the desired result in a great number of cases. The rapidly repeated French phrase, sounding like passa 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 passa, constitutes the magic formula in this case. The additional statement, to be repeated 20 times without stopping, is, every day in every way I am getting better and better. If you have studied carefully what we have told you concerning the active principle of suggestion or autosuggestion, you will discover the real stuff that does the work in this verbal formula that is obtaining such marked results, according to the foreign press. The great virtue of this particular formula lies in its simplicity, and in its catchy sound. It supplies an attractive verbal capsule for the stuff that does the work, i.e., suggestion. Subconscious habitual action. Another interesting and important phase of the manifestations of the subconscious is that concerned with the performance of more or less complex habitual physical actions. By far the greater portion of your ordinary physical movements are performed by your subconscious operating along the lines of habit or acquired automatic action. All habit actions or acquired automatic actions are performed under the direction of the subconscious. Your first attempts at walking, writing, operating a typewriter, playing an instrument, running a sewing machine, or carrying on any similar operation involving repeated muscular movements, were accompanied by an intense consciousness of every detail of the required movements. As you became more proficient in the task, by reason of repeated practice and repetition, and as you acquired ease and dexterity in such performance, you gradually became less and less conscious of those details. Finally, you reached the stage in which you were able to perform the movements practically without conscious effort. But while your ordinary consciousness is no longer involved in the habitual acquired action, your subconscious is most decidedly involved in it. The performance has been merely transferred from your ordinary conscious mental mechanism to your extraordinary subconscious mental mechanism. Your mind is as much involved in the performance when the habit is acquired, as it was at the beginning, though you are not consciously aware of the fact. Your mind has not withdrawn from the task, it has merely transferred the performance from one field of its activities to another. It was formerly the fashion of philosophers to attempt to explain this well-known class of phenomena upon the theory that the acquired muscular movements became automatic, in the sense of purely mechanical. They held that the mind was no longer concerned with the muscular activities, and that the muscles had learned to perform the necessary actions involuntarily, automatically, and of themselves. But, they admitted, it could not be denied that the mind seemed to be always in the background, hovering around the task, as it were, and ready to resume its control should such necessity present itself. But certain thoughtful psychologists dissented from this crude theory, which, in fact, was no real theory at all but rather a confession of ignorance on the part of those advancing it. Lewis, an early authority, protested against the crude theory just mentioned. He said, "We are not conscious of the separate sensations which guide speech and writing. Are these processes mechanical? By no means. We know that they were laboriously learned by long tentative efforts, each of which was accompanied by distinct consciousness. To suppose that we pass from the psychical to the physical by frequent repetition, would lead to the monstrous conclusion that, when a naturalist has by laborious study become so familiarized with the specific marks of an animal or plant that he can recognize at a glance a particular species, or recognize by a single character the nature of the rest, the rapidity and certainty of this judgment proves it to be a mechanical, not a mental act." He continues, "The point never to be left out of sight is that actions which are known to be preceded and accompanied by sensations do not lose their special character of sentience because they are not preceded and accompanied by that peculiar state which is specially called consciousness. When we see a man playing the piano, and at the same time talking of something far removed from the music, we say that his fingers move unconsciously, but we do not conclude that he is a musical machine. Muscular sensations and musical sensation regulate the movements of his fingers, and if he strikes a false note, or if one of the notes jangles, he is instantly aware of the fact. That a particular group of sensations, such as musical tones, will set going a particular group of muscular movements without the intervention of any conscious effort is not more to be interpreted on purely mechanical principles than that a certain phrase will cause a storyteller to repeat a certain anecdote, or an old soldier to fight his battles o'er again. The later recognition that mind may function on planes or levels other than those of ordinary consciousness, the discovery of the plane or world of the subconscious, in short, put an end to these early controversies, and gave to even the most orthodox philosopher or psychologist an avenue of escape from his previous dilemma. At the present time, it is generally accepted that practically all of our habitual muscular movements, and this means by far the greater part of our entire muscular movements, are performed by the subconscious. Not only do you walk, speak, write, operate machines and play instruments in this way, but you also dress yourself, put on your shoes and your hat, adjust your spectacles, proceed to and from your daily work, wind your clock, lock your doors, put out your cat, and perform most of your customary little tasks of life in precisely this way, i.e., largely under the direction and control of your subconscious. How often have you been wrapped in a brown study, and have become practically unconscious of your surroundings, yet have walked home from your train, crossing crowded streets, dodging automobiles, escaping contact with other pedestrians, and finding yourself, at last, in front of your door with latchkey in hand? A little thought on the subject will reveal to you the startling fact that you perform the major portion of your habitual physical actions practically, automatically, that is to say by means of your subconscious. Hearing these statements of facts for the first time, you may say, "Pooh. I simply remembered how to do these things by repeated performance, and did not have to use my mind about them each time, that is all there is to it." But stop a moment, is this really all there is to it? You cannot remember just what particular shoe you put on first every morning, you cannot remember just which arm you place first in your coat every morning, you cannot remember every little motion, twist and turn you employ in tying your necktie each time you dress. But your subconscious remembers it perfectly, and is thereby able to perform these tasks properly every day, without calling upon your conscious mentality for assistance. If you try on an old, and different, pair of shoes, long since laid aside, if you take up once more a style of necktie which you have not worn for years, you will find that your subconscious will remember every motion of tying the shoes or the necktie, though it would be impossible for your conscious mentality to describe the process in detail, or to remember the exact motions to be employed. Professor Joseph Jastrow, in one of his works, gives us several interesting personal experiences designed to illustrate the trouble experienced by the individual when his conscious mentality attempts to boss the job which long since has been taken over by the subconscious. The following will serve to illustrate the principle. He says, "I can readily adjust a certain kind of necktie which I wear only occasionally, if I do not put my attention upon it but let my hands follow their ingrained habits. If, however, I begin to reason which end goes over, and which under, and watch my movements in the mirror, a hopeless failure is the likely issue." The following verse furnishes a humorous illustration of the same principle. Here the centipede gets along quite well with its subconscious direction of its many legs, until the playful toad suggests that the many-legged one should direct his conscious mentality to boss the job, then see what happens. The centipede was happy quite until the toad, for fun, said, "Pray, which leg comes after which?" This wrought his mind to such a pitch. He lay distracted in the ditch, considering how to run. Many persons quite proficient in the performance of delicate muscular movements find it almost impossible to teach others, by words, how the work is executed. It is only when they say, "It is like this," accompanying the words with the actual physical demonstration, that the desired instruction is imparted. The instructor in any branch of manual work, the dancing master, the teacher of skating, shooting, billiards, etc., can hope to teach his pupil to catch the movement only by imitation. He must lead his pupil to imitate the teacher's movements until he has made them his own, i.e., until his subconscious assimilates the movement and takes over its performance. It is an axiom of manual training that the pupil never really knows how to perform the manual task with proficiency until he is able to perform it along subconscious lines, although that term is not employed by the teachers and workmen. The pupil must continue to put his mind on it until he is able to have his subconscious take over the task. The skilled performance of a technical musical composition by a young woman who is conversing entertainingly with the young man who is turning the sheets of her music, and who possibly is also engaged at the same time in a roguish eye flirtation with the admiring youth, demonstrates forcibly the fact that the subconscious of the young woman is on the job so far as the musical performance is concerned. The subconscious of the experienced hostess, who is able to converse brilliantly with her guests at the dinner table, while missing nothing concerning the service being furnished them, and who at the same time is observing minutely the costumes of the visiting women, also is manifesting its efficiency. The same is true of the subconscious of the typist who is busily engaged in transcribing her notes, rapidly operating her machine, and yet at the same time is noting carefully the conversation of her fellow workers, or of her employer and his visitor. Examples of this kind are always at hand. You will note them now that your attention has been directed to the subject. You have but to recall the thoughts indulged in by you when you were shaving this morning. You do not remember the motions of your razor, because you were too busy thinking about something else even to note the physical movements at the time, but your subconscious was on the job, nevertheless. In fact, it shaves you every morning. This action of your subconscious is the result of that law of your mental being which makes for efficiency and utility, the instinctive urge toward obtaining the maximum of necessary muscular movement with the minimum expenditure of conscious attention. Were you compelled to exert the original degree of conscious attention in every repeated performance of a physical movement, you would not only fail to obtain proficiency, speed, ease and general efficiency of movement, but you would also experience the same degree of mental fatigue which marked the original performance of the task. Conscious attention requires a great outlay of nervous energy, and such expenditure is fatiguing. Proficiency and efficiency in any line of work depends largely upon the ability to pass the performance of the work on to the subconscious, this, however, only after the conscious faculties have thoroughly mastered the necessary experience concerning the details of the task. Kay states the rule as follows: the more we cultivate and train any power or faculty, the more easily and rapidly does it perform its work. The less that consciousness is concerned in it, the more work does it accomplish, and the less does it suffer from fatigue. Our mental progress, then, is in the direction of our becoming unconscious, or largely unconscious, of many of our activities. Abercrombie says, "There is a remarkable law of the system by which actions at first requiring much attention are after frequent repetition performed with a much less degree of it, or without the mind being conscious of any effort. This is exemplified in various processes of daily occurrence, as reading or writing, but most remarkably in music." But here we must call your attention to an important point, and to indicate a source of danger. Just as a manager of a large establishment would be seriously handicapped were he to be deprived of his helpers and forced to perform all the details of the work himself, so, likewise, the work of the establishment would be seriously affected were the manager to fail to maintain a supervision over his subordinate workers. This is just as true in the case of the mind as in that of the establishment to which we have just referred. The subconscious is just as apt to pick up bad habits and methods as good ones, and it also easily tends to fall into bad habits of making shortcuts of doubtful value, or to adopt slouchy methods of operation. The conscious mentality, while not attempting to perform the detail work which is far better and more efficiently performed by the subconscious, should, nevertheless, always maintain a vigilant supervision of the results and output of the mental establishment. It should continue to examine the output, and to pass upon the results, and if these be faulty or unsatisfactory, it should insist upon an improvement and a correction of the erroneous methods and processes. It should allow the subconscious to perform the detail work without meddlesome interference, but, at the same time, it should hold the subconscious responsible for the efficient performance of the tasks committed to its care. The work of educating the subconscious in this matter, or of correcting it when needed, is based upon certain quite well-defined principles which we shall now present to you. These principles should be carefully considered by you, and their main points committed to memory, for they are very useful and necessary. Strange to say, while all persons continually employ the subconscious in their everyday work, very few are acquainted with the principles involved in the education and correction of its faculties and powers, notwithstanding that these principles are very simple and are easily employed. The scientific method is far preferable to the hit or miss or higgledy-piggledy methods usually employed. Educating and directing the subconscious. I. Begin with concentrated attention. This rule is based upon the fact that the more the conscious attention is given to a new physical movement or operation at the start, and during the early stages of its acquirement, the more readily and more thoroughly does the subconscious acquire the knack of performing that movement or operation after it has been transmitted to it. The degree of conscious attention given to the task in the first place determines the degree of the impression made upon the subconscious, and the greater the degree of such impression, the more effective will be the subsequent performance of the task by the subconscious after it has taken over the matter. The same rule applies to the correction of the subconscious when it requires such by reason of faulty performance. The basic principles must be first thoroughly acquired by the conscious mentality, by means of concentrated attention. These are then transmitted to the subconscious, which thereafter acquires proficiency by repeated performance. The start must be a good one, if the finish is to be satisfactory. 2. Recognize the subconscious. By a strange and seldom recognized law of psychology, the actual recognition of the subconscious by the conscious mentality serves to establish a strong bond of mutual interest, coordination and cooperation between the two planes of the mind. This results in a far greater degree of receptivity by the subconscious, in the first place, and a far greater degree of efficiency on its part, in the second place. You will do well to enter into the spirit of this idea, even to the extent of thinking of the subconscious as being a real personal helper. You may address it, and treat it in general, as if it were indeed an independent, intelligent entity. It certainly is intelligent, though not really independent of your mental being. You may mentally address it, saying, "Here, subconscious. This is the way I want this thing done, this is the right way to do it. I am learning the hang of this thing, the knack of doing it efficiently, in the best possible way, in the least possible time, and with the least possible expenditure of energy. I want you to watch me closely so that you will acquire the knack of efficiency in doing it, so that you may do it still better when I turn it over to you." You may smile at this apparently fanciful idea, but it works out in actual practice. Treat the subconscious as a working partner, and see how quickly, eagerly and effectively it will respond. 3. Don't meddle with the subconscious, but trust it. Following out the idea last stated, give the subconscious a chance to do its work when you have turned a task over to it. Examine its results, supervise its output, but don't meddle with its detail work. Do not bewilder it when it is performing the task. Remember the fate of the centipede in the verse previously quoted. The subconscious is somewhat sensitive, and at times suffers from stage fright if meddled with. Treat it kindly, and show confidence in it. Employ diplomacy in dealing with it, use the iron hand if necessary, but do not forget the velvet glove on that hand. The subconscious has something like the artistic temperament of the opera singer. It must be handled properly in order to get the best results. It is an excellent player of golf, and a driver of automobiles, but you must show it that you trust it while it is playing or driving, and must not rattle it by meddlesome interference. Make a friend and a brother of your subconscious. You will never regret it. Subconscious emotion and memory. The subconscious plays such an important part in the processes of emotion and memory, respectively, that it truly may be said that without taking into consideration the part played in them by the subconscious there can be no intelligent understanding of the nature of emotion or memory, nor of their manifestations. In the regions of the subconscious lie the emotional tendencies and inclinations which rise into conscious manifestation upon contact with the objects which furnish the stimuli for such manifestation. You have often been surprised by the rise into conscious feeling of certain emotional tendencies of the existence of which you have heretofore been unaware. You have often found dwelling within your inner nature the material for feelings and emotions from which you had previously deemed yourself entirely free. It has been well said that in the subconscious emotional nature of every individual there is to be found the whole menagerie of elemental subconscious power feelings, the animals awaiting only the opening of the door of consciousness to make their appearance. Your feelings and emotions are determined not alone by your conscious sensations and ideas, but also by the imperceptible influence of subconscious impressions, of which only the sum of the resulting effects manifest in consciousness. This explains the mystery and inexplicable character of so many of your emotional experiences, the uprush of unsuspected feelings. Not knowing the definite causes of these mental states, you find them incomprehensible. You have within you a quiet and unseen growth of subconscious emotional influences which often prove to be important factors in your mental life. You are not conscious of the existence of these influences until, when the appropriate stimuli call them forth, they manifest a distinctly marked character and often a decided urge to action. Psychoanalysis of quite a simple character tends to reveal the existence of some of these hidden emotional states of which it has been said, they, more than knowledge, make us what we are, but there still exists within us an even larger area of such emotional character which is unsuspected by us and of which we become aware only under exceptional circumstances. Only extended and deep psychoanalysis reveals these elements to us, so far below the surface of consciousness do they lie. Professor Joseph Jastrow says, ******, a still larger and more vital part lies submerged in the subconscious areas of character and disposition, effectively modifying the organic efficiency and the quality of our talents, yet so subtly, so fluidly, as to impart an unanalyzable genius to all that is most worthwhile in what we feel and think and do and are. Such emotional factors of our psychology penetrate more fundamentally than do the intellectual ones into the fiber of our being, and so are more intrinsically influences of the subconscious order, more submerged, more intuitive and less revealed. The subconscious emotional material from which your conscious emotional states are created and composed may be arranged for convenience into the following three classes, these however, not being mutually exclusive, viz. 1. Emotions arising from physical causes. This class of subconscious emotional material arises from physical conditions themselves unperceived by conscious sensation, but which manifest in subconscious emotional states which gradually rise to the plane of consciousness. In this class are included your moods, which arise without any relation to your actual experiences with the outside world. You are not conscious of what is going on in your internal physical organism, except in cases of marked abnormal conditions, but your subconscious is aware of these physical conditions, and frequently reflects them in the form of emotional states. Far more soul experiences arise from reflected physical conditions than we usually realize or are willing to concede. One's romantic melancholy is very frequently the direct result of an inactive liver reflected in the subconscious emotional states, or, perhaps, from subconscious sexual activities or processes. 2. Combinations of minute emotional material. This class of emotional material consists of the scattered elements of personal experience, each of which is too weak or unimportant to manifest as emotion, but which, combined and fused by the subconscious, thereafter tend to rise to the conscious levels of the mind. You are constantly receiving such emotional material of which you are not conscious at the time. Emotional experiences must be of a certain magnitude or intensity in order to rise to the plane of consciousness. As Lewis says, many impressions are either so faint in themselves, or so familiar, so submerged in stronger impressions, or so incapable of exciting trains of reflex feeling in the preoccupied mind, that we are neither conscious of them when present, nor capable of remembering them afterward. And, as Ribot says, a certain amount of time is necessary for an impression to be perceived, and an essential condition of consciousness is wanting when the duration of the nervous process falls below the minimum. But, although not recognized in consciousness, many of such emotional impressions tend to unite and to become fused together in the subconscious, and thus acquire such strength as to cause disturbances on the conscious surface of the mind. As Holmes says, they never emerge into consciousness, but yet make their influence felt among the perceptible mental currents, just as the unseen planets sway the movements of those that are watched and mapped by the astronomer. At other times these fused impressions of the subconscious will acquire such vigor that they will cause a veritable upheaval on the conscious plane. They will fairly explode into consciousness in a way startling to the individual who previously was not at all aware that he felt just that way about such things. 3. Emotions of racial memory. This class of emotional material consists of race experiences transmitted by heredity, through racial memory, or instinct, which rise into consciousness when the appropriate stimuli present themselves. Most of your most fundamental and elemental emotions have come to you in this way, i.e., through racial memory of the past experiences of the race, reaching you as instinctive feeling. Instinct, at the last, is out-inherited racial memory, memory of the past experience of the race. As memory is fundamentally a function and process of the subconscious, it follows that the instinctive emotions are essentially subconscious in character. There flows through you the deep stream of racial memory which has come down to you from countless generations of the race. In that stream are the materials of some of the most elemental and fundamental emotional states which rise to the surface of your consciousness when the appropriate stimulus presents itself. The experiences of your long line of ancestors have been impressed upon that racial memory. That memory has been transmitted to you and forms a portion of your subconscious mental records. But do not let this thought disturb you, do not share the popular false conception of heredity as a bugaboo. As Burbank has said, heredity means much, but what is heredity? Not some hideous ancestral specter, forever crossing the path of a human being. Heredity is merely the sum of all the effects of all the environments of all past generations on the responsive ever-moving life forces. Heredity is merely racial memory, and is no more to be feared than is your own individual memory. All of the three above stated classes of subconscious emotional states, together with their countless variations and combinations, dwell below the levels of consciousness, on the great planes of the subconscious, except at such times when they are called into conscious activity, when they spring from the depths, just the flying fish raising itself into the air from the body of deep water which is its home. If asked in what form they abide in the subconscious, or just where they rest, the only answer is that they abide there in the same general form, and rest in the same general region, as does the subconscious memory of the actions of the fingers of the skilled musician, or the subconscious memories of the many things which you have experienced but of which you are not conscious at the present moment, though the recollection of these will take place when you demand it. You are conscious of only a very small percentage of the things you know, and of that which you feel, and of those actions which you are able to perform proficiently and efficiently. By far the greater part of these mental states or conditions, or whatever you may choose to call them, lies beneath the levels of consciousness, in the deep regions of the subconscious, in the depths of that great mental ocean of your being of which your ordinary consciousness is merely the surface. You will do well to cease thinking of these planes of mentality as places in space, think of them rather as states of mind. Of all of the offices and processes of the subconscious, that phase concerned with memory is perhaps the most characteristic. This, because memory in some of its aspects is involved in all of the other phases of subconscious mental activity. Memory itself is so involved with subconscious mentation that it cannot be disentangled from it. Without the processes of memory, none of the other manifestations of subconscious activity would be possible, and, likewise, without the existence of the subconscious there could not exist that great subconscious storehouse of memory in which the memory records are stored, and from which they are brought out in the processes of recollection and raised again to the plane of consciousness. Memory, in its most general meaning, is the conscious revival of past mental experiences. It follows logically that the experience, in order to be afterward remembered, i.e., recalled into consciousness, must in the meantime be impressed and stored away in some region of the mind. That such region of the mind is not that of the ordinary consciousness we know by personal experience, we know that by effort we raise these impressions from somewhere up to the plane of consciousness. That somewhere is the realm of the subconscious, that part of the region of the subconscious which is called the storehouse of memory. Halleck says, "It has often been asked, where are the images of memory when they are not present in consciousness? We see a man one day, but do not think of him again for a month. We can then call up a distinct image of him. Where was the image of the man during the month?" The theory is that the full-fledged idea is in the mind, but slumbering below the stream of consciousness, just as a person is alive when sound asleep, without being aware of the fact. When we are not conscious of an idea, it is believed to disappear just as a diver does beneath the surface of the water, and the idea is held to keep its form as intact as does the diver during this disappearance. It is impossible to account for the nature of memory except upon the hypothesis that there is much in the mind of which we are unconscious. We are conscious of only a small part of what exists in our minds. That which we know to remain in the mind, but of which we are not conscious at the time, must be thought of as being stored away in the subconscious. When we recall it, it rises to the plane of consciousness; at all other times it is below the level of consciousness. Likewise, we could not recognize a past experience as such, when it is recalled in some way, unless at least some trace of it had continued in existence in the mind. Many leading psychologists, in fact, have held that an impression once made upon the record sheets of the subconscious always remains there, even though it may never again be called into the conscious field of attention. Likewise, they hold that even though such impressions may never again come into consciousness, nevertheless they exert a subtle and silent influence upon our views, convictions, habits, feelings, emotions, judgments, and actions. The Freudian school lays great stress upon this fact, and its method of psychoanalysis is directed largely to the work of digging out these submerged memories of past experiences which have been disturbing the emotional balance. Morel says, "Every single effort of mind is a creation which can never go back again into nonentity. It may slumber in the depths of forgetfulness as light and heat slumber in the coal seams, but there it is, ready at the bidding of some appropriate stimulus to come out of the darkness into the light of consciousness." Hollander says, "We may forget objects and events, that is to say, we may dismiss them from our consciousness, but they are stored up in our subconsciousness to the end of our days." Says another writer, "Our mental impressions may never again come up before consciousness, but they nevertheless remain in that vast ultra-conscious region of the mind, subconsciously or unconsciously molding and fashioning our subsequent thought and actions." Fever patients have been known to converse in the language of the country in which their early childhood has been spent, though they had apparently entirely forgotten that tongue. Several typical cases of this kind are recorded in the textbooks in which patients in delirium have recited long passages, sometimes entire chapters, from books in foreign languages which they did not understand in their normal condition, but which books had been read from in their presence many years before. Persons rescued from drowning or hanging have testified that many of the events of their past lives were presented to their consciousness with utmost clearness and minuteness of detail, and with a lightning-like rapidity of sequence. Dying persons not infrequently go back in memory to the days of their early childhood, and, after a lapse of 50, 60, 70, or even more years, will recite the most trifling events of those early days with wonderful minuteness of detail. Cases of this kind are numerous, and are too well authenticated to permit of doubt of their substantial correctness. The theory of coincidence is absurd when applied to such cases. Of like nature is the frequent experience of dreams in which many apparently forgotten incidents of childhood and youth are presented in clear detail. In some instances the person is convinced of the truth of the recollection only by the assurances of older relatives familiar with the facts of the original experience. The work of the subconscious in the processes of memory, however, is not confined to the office of furnishing a subconscious storehouse of memory impressions. It has other and still more complicated tasks to perform. It not only stores away the memory records, but it has also its own particular system of indexing and cross-indexing them, of searching for these records when they are demanded on the conscious plane, and of finding them and presenting them to consciousness, perhaps long after the conscious demand for them has ceased, and when the person is thinking about something entirely different. You have often experienced this delayed finding of the missing memory record. After you have given up all hope of ever recalling it to memory, then all of a sudden the missing name, number, or detail fairly pops into consciousness, sometimes in an almost startling fashion. Let us describe in somewhat fanciful form, yet in a form which accurately represents the actual working out of the processes, these activities of the subconscious which are concerned with memory. In the first place, we shall compare your mechanism of memory recording to the recording apparatus of a phonograph. In each case, the receiving diaphragm and the receiving record are both there. The impression of sensation, emotion, or action is recorded on the moving cylinder of the memory, i.e., of the subconscious mechanism concerned with memory. The impression may be clear and strong, or else faint and weak, according to the circumstances of the original experience. Then begin the more complex activities of the subconscious, in its processes of memory. The records bearing the impressions are immediately carried below the plane of consciousness, and are stored with more or less care, depending upon the habit of the individual, in the great storehouse of memory in the realm of the subconscious. But this is only the beginning. The stored away memory records would be of no practical use to you were you unable to find them when needed. Accordingly, the subconscious employs methods tending to facilitate the future finding and presentation of these records. In order that these memory records be rendered available, they must be, 1. Stored in a systematic manner, each in a section containing impressions of a similar class, 2. Plainly labeled so that they may be recognized when seen by the memory clerks employed by the subconscious for this purpose, and 3. Carefully indexed and cross-indexed in the memory books of the subconscious, so that the loose end of memory may always be taken hold of by the searching clerks. The storing away process, and particularly the indexing and cross-indexing process, constitutes the work of what we have somewhat fancifully called the clerks of the subconscious. In fact, indeed, they certainly act like real clerks instead of mere processes. There is a great difference in the degree of proficiency of these memory clerks, particularly in the case of the indexers and cross-indexers. This difference depends largely upon the memory training of the individual. Some persons have their memory records so closely cross-indexed that if they cannot find the missing record at once by means of the direct index, they set the memory clerks to work discovering the cross-indexed references to it, and in a short time the record is found and passed on to the other helpers who then raise it to the plane of consciousness, where it is placed on the reproducing phonograph of memory and caused to repeat the original impression. So, you see, the conscious mentality plays only a subordinate part in the processes of memory. It merely records the impressions, and afterward reproduces them when they are placed before its mechanism. The storing, the indexing, the searching and discovery of the records, and the final raising of the records up to the reproducing mechanism of consciousness, each and all are performed by the subconscious through its processes and clerks. In fact, through the study of the processes of memory you will gain a much more comprehensive and much more practical idea of the nature of the subconscious, and of its methods of work, than is possible through the study of any other one class of its activities and phenomena. The Freudian school has directed particular attention to the fact that the subconscious sometimes seems determined to make the individual forget certain things which are unpleasant and disagreeable to him, and to encourage the recollection and remembrance of things of an agreeable nature. The many works written by Freud and his followers give many, and often quite amusing, instances of this particular trait of the subconscious. For instance, one finds it easy to forget to pay a bill containing charges deemed extortionate, or for services not deemed satisfactory, this entirely aside from the common disinclination to part with one's money. Again, he tends to forget promises, engagements, or other duties which are associated with unpleasant persons, things, or events. Moreover, he tends to forget the names of persons and places which have unpleasant associations. Something about him wants to forget it, in these cases, and tries in many ways to accomplish its purpose. In a recent magazine article, a celebrated psychoanalyst of the Freudian school is quoted as saying, earlier students of the mind assumed that forgetting was merely a passive process, the failure to remember. Freud discovered that forgetting is the active effort of the mind to protect the individual from pain and unpleasantness. Unpleasant experiences, and people associated with them, do not merely slip out of the mind, they are actively thrust out and kept under control by a mechanism which Freud metaphorically termed the censorship. You remember the things you really want to remember. You do the things you really want to do. You recall the people you really like, and want to recall. You will discover that the things or the people you forget, or lose, are associated with something unpleasant, and have been automatically relegated by the censor into the limbo of the unconscious. Thus psychoanalysis adds to the troubles of the husband who seeks to explain to a Freud-perfect wife how he came to forget to mail those letters to her relatives, and to those of the lover of a Freud-perfect sweetheart who tries to account for the fact that he happened to forget the date of his first meeting with her, or that he overlooked some little thing she had asked him to do for her. Freud has contributed to the list of the little things which serve to make modern life so complex, particularly for the male of the species.